right? I'm referencing both your shape and your colour.
Okay.
That would be racist, right?
See, this is the thing.
Would that be racist?
Yeah. If I said Ethiopians are raisin heads, that would be racist. That's not what the Prophet peace be upon him said.
When ISIS kidnapped Christians and had them as slaves, is it wrong or right?
It was wrong.
When the Ottoman Empire kidnapped Christians and made them slaves, is it wrong or right?
There's probably some cases where it was wrong, yes.
Probably. So there are some cases where it was right. This brother's position is that in war you can take Muslims and Christians and anyone else as slaves. Does anyone see the problem that none of them have a problem with slavery?
If you know the transatlantic slave trade, you know that the Portuguese were the first Europeans to come to Africa and to torment and to destroy the lives of millions of people. Millions of people.
So tell me you're proud. Tell me you're proud of the right to own people as property.
But why?
Can you please, this is about slavery. Can you please read about it?
Yeah, next week you can talk to him.
The Islamic slave trade has lasted for 1400 years and it is still going on today in Sudan, in Mauritania, in Saudi Arabia, and without any prompting from me, Kuwait. Are you proud of Muhammad's example, and therefore are you proud that you have the right to own a slave? Are we good to go roll? Good to roll? Yeah. So I want to talk about 9 reasons why I am not a Muslim. 9 reasons why I reject Islam. The first of those reasons is the claim that Islam provides a perfect law. Muslims claim that Sharia law is a divine law, that it is given by God in its fullness and in its completeness, and that law is perfect. However, this actually is not true. What really happens is that Muslim scholars will take some reference or some vague principle in the Quran and then construct how you apply that law to the world. An example of this would be the fact that in the Quran it talks about fasting. It says that you know the times of fasting by when you can tell the difference between black cotton and white cotton at the rising and the setting of the sun. However, what do you do about places like Greenland where there is no rising and setting of the sun? The way that Muslims have adapted their law is to speculate and to make up a principle that you either do it off the nearest country where there's a rising and the setting of the sun, or you can do it off Saudi Arabia, or that you do it off some other timing. But it's not clear from the text of the Quran or from the text of the Hadith that this is what you do. So what they are doing is they are inventing their law. Their scholars are inventing their law, and that's one example on something as fundamental as fasting. It is just the same as a Christian politician taking a Christian principle and applying it to a secular state and saying that because of this Christian principle we are going to apply Christian laws. So this is the first reason why I'm not a Muslim. The claim that Sharia law is a divine law is a lie. It is a falsehood. Sharia law is created by Muslim scholars based upon hadiths that were written later, and the Muslims themselves don't agree. Another reason why I am not a Muslim is because Sharia law does not provide a better society than secular law. Secular law in the West has provided a better economic justice, more social freedom, more social equality than Sharia law. And to prove my point, I say, look at Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is an area of the world where Islam has dominated unchallenged for 1400 years. And people are not exactly flooding to Saudi Arabia to live. In fact, actually, many Saudi citizens are actually fleeing Saudi Arabia to live outside of an Islamic society because the freedoms and the equalities of a liberal secular society are more preferable to the restrictions of Sharia law. Sharia law doesn't solve the problems it claims to solve. So we're no better for it or without it. And I'm not saying that liberal secular law is perfect, and I'm not saying that liberal secular law is brilliant, because it most certainly isn't. But what I am saying is that this promise of utopia that is given by Sharia law is a lie. It is false. The third reason why I'm not a Muslim is because of textual variants in the Quran. Muslims make the claim that their Quran is unchanged, unedited, and has remained the same for 1400 years, dot for dot, word for word, letter for letter. That is the claim of people like Ahmadiyya. That is the claim of people like Zakir Naik. But the reality is, when you look at different texts of the Quran, you compare the most modern Quran to the oldest Quran, there are textual variants within them. And Muslims have made an argument that textual variance within biblical manuscripts is sufficient reason to doubt the reliability of those biblical manuscripts. Therefore, by using their logic, we can conclude that if there are textual variants in the Quran, that the Quran also cannot be trusted. Furthermore, the criticism about textual variants within the Bible, making the Bible invalid, is not a valid argument, because any genuine understanding of the Christian faith understands that the Christian faith came before the text. The text emerged out of the Christian community. It was written by Christians, it was written for Christians, and Christians are the ones to handle and interpret it. Whereas, by contrast, Islam is a religion based on the book of the Quran. That is what Muhammad started, and the community formed around the book. So therefore, when there are changes to the book, that is a problem. My fourth reason for continuing to be a Christian rather than embracing Islam is the false argument made by Muslims that because our understanding of our faith has evolved in terms of the way that we describe central doctrines like the Trinity, which the language of which was canonized at the Council of Nicaea, because of this development, that therefore our faith was invented. The fact that you can evidence that Christians were worshipping Father, Son and Holy Spirit from the earliest times is totally ignored by Muslim polemicists. And it also ignores the fact that Islam underwent historical change. The hadiths are new, they weren't there at the time of Muhammad. The Islamic schools of law were new, they weren't there at the time of Muhammad. The fact is that Islam has developed. The theology of the Quran being an eternal book was something disputed by early Muslims known as the Mutasilites. And it wasn't until that disputation that Muslims came to the conclusion and canonized that conclusion that the Quran was eternal. So in Islam there is historical development, and yet Muslims say that any historical development is evidence that that religion can't be trusted. Furthermore, there is an inherent contradiction within Islam where the Quran says that on this day I have perfected your religion, which means that in the time of Muhammad the religion of Islam was said to be perfect. If something is perfect, why do you need to add anything to it? And yet we see in historical development things were added to Islam. Hadiths were added to Islam. Understandings of doctrines developed. These were not normative at the time of Muhammad, they came later. My fifth reason for not being a Muslim and for rejecting Islam is the irreliability of the hadiths. The reality is that despite all their rhetoric, despite all their claims about how isnad and hadith science and matin and the science of hadith guarantees that the hadiths are a reliable corpus of text, the reality is that Muslims themselves have no certainty. Muslims themselves are in disagreement about which hadiths can be trusted and which hadiths cannot be trusted. Shia and Sunni Muslims, whilst both making the same claims about the reliability of hadiths, do not agree about which hadiths can be trusted. They disagree, demonstrating the fact that they have no certainty. We see in the park on a regular basis Muslims chucking their hadiths under the bus. Even when you quote a Sahih Bukhari hadith to a Salafi Muslim, they will still chuck that hadith under the bus if they find that hadith too embarrassing, too controversial, or too contradictory to something that they believe. And if Muslims themselves, sorry Yahya, I'm just doing a talk to the camera. I'm just going to have to talk over Yahya because I found myself a heckler. So the reality is that Muslims themselves have no agreement about which hadiths can be trusted, and if they themselves cannot know what hadiths can be trusted, why should any of us trust the corpus of hadiths?
Our scale is the Quran.
My sixth reason
If any hadith
for denying and rejecting, don't be rude, Yahya.
I will be rude.
There we go.
You are.
This is the kind of supremacist ideology.
And I'm
So,
answering you.
I'm not asking for an answer. I'm giving my reasons as to why I reject Islam. My sixth reason for rejecting Islam is the fact that Paul and his Christianity defeated all opposition. The reality is that the Quran makes a promise to the followers of Jesus, and that promise that the Quran makes to the followers of Jesus, the fact is that that promise that was made to the followers of Jesus is that they, the Muslims of the first century, would be made superior over the disbelievers in Jesus and the Islam of his day. But the reality is,
and you don't
that the Apostolic Church was the movement that won out over all other opposition. Paul and Peter and James and Thomas and Thaddeus and all the apostles were victorious. And so the promise made by the Quran was proven false, because the Quran made a promise that the Muslim followers of Jesus would be superior, and they were not. They are not anywhere in history. No one even knows about them. No one talks about them. No one argues with them. No one disputes with them. There isn't a shred of evidence that they ever existed. And that is a historical fact. They did not exist. The Quran made a false promise and put it in the words of Allah, and that false promise is not true.
Let me give you the
my eighth reason, because my eighth reason is because I didn't invite Yahya to a debate. He's just forcing his way into a conversation that I am having with the camera.
No, have it with the camera, but don't.
My eighth reason for rejecting Islam is that supposedly a perfect man, a great prophet called Muhammad, established a perfect system called Sharia law, and in that Sharia law there was a caliph, a system of law, a political system, that was perfect, that was from God. And that prophet was succeeded by rightly guided caliphs in a perfect system. Thank you. And that perfect system died. Where is it? Where is the caliphate now? The caliphate is dead and buried. It was a socio-political economic experiment that failed in history.
Would you allow me to answer?
Why did it fail?
Would you
After
allow
I
me to
finished.
answer?
After I finished.
You will never
After I finish, Mr. Bean. Your patience, please.
Is that
The reason why
you know my
the
name?
caliphate failed is because it wasn't perfect, and it wasn't perfect because it wasn't from God, and it wasn't from God because Muhammad wasn't a perfect man, and he didn't establish a perfect system. By contrast, we Christians believe that the ecclesiam, the church, was founded by Jesus Christ on his apostles, and you can find the church today in every country of the earth, and you can find the church today even in Saudi Arabia, where you can't even find the caliphate. So the very place where Muhammad established his so-called perfect system, his socio-economic political reality, and where Islam has remained unchallenged for 1400 years, you can't even find the failed Islamic caliphate. But you can find secret Christian believers in Medina, Riyadh and Mecca. The underground church is alive in Saudi Arabia, where the caliphate is dead. And so we don't need Islam, we don't need a caliphate. What we need is Christ's church.
But you can say the same thing about mosques.
My final reason, and then Mr. Bean can respond. My final reason for rejecting Islam is Muhammad himself. Now, many Muslims who can hear my voice believe that the last example of a genuine Islamic caliphate was the Ottoman Empire. So let me look at the Ottoman Empire and know them by their fruits. The Ottoman Empire invaded lands that were not their own. The Ottoman Empire persecuted Christians and Jews. The Ottoman Empire kidnapped and enslaved Christians by the millions. The Ottoman Empire indoctrinated children as child soldiers and sent them back to kill their own mothers and fathers and to rape their own sisters and cousins. The Ottoman Empire had a slave trade. The Ottoman Empire desecrated churches. The Ottoman Empire stole land and property and riches that were not their own.
But they're not representing Islam.
So the Ottomans don't represent Islam. Do the Ottomans represent Islam? To an extent, yes.
Yeah. But at the same way, the Byzantines also represent Christianity. And everything that you said about Islam and everything you said about Jesus, I can find with the Prophet Muhammad, I can find in Islam also. So
Okay, let's do a quick test of that claim.
What you've done right now was very carefully, selectively looked at history, and you pointed out what you didn't like. But then at the same time, you know, history is extremely complex and it's not one-dimensional. You, for example, claimed, you did say that Christianity, you said that the Christians fought against slavery for 2,000 years.
Yep.
You know what, I agree with you to an extent. But then also, if you look in history, you'll find that the Slavic people in East Europe were enslaved by the Romans who freshly converted to Christianity.
Yep.
So you find this in history throughout.
So now let me return to that point, because you said I was very selective. So let's be very specific. Did Muhammad own slaves?
Yes, he did.
Did Muhammad permit his followers to sell slaves?
Yes.
Did Jesus?
No.
So there's a difference.
Okay, and why?
So now, hold on one second.
Okay.
If I follow the example of Jesus,
Yeah.
and you follow the example of Muhammad,
Yeah.
which one of us can own another human being as a property?
Well, I wouldn't want to.
No, that wasn't my
Yeah,
question.
Yeah.
I said according to our religion,
Yeah.
which one of us can?
I can.
There you go.
If they-
That's the
hold
difference.
On, hold on. Close to it, and the clause is that if I live in a society where it's normative, you were speaking of something that was normative during the time of Jesus being alive.
Yes.
And that slave owning was
Normative.
the rule of the day.
And he
Now-
didn't. But
now-
did Muhammad?
Now.
But did Muhammad?
I already explained to you that he did.
Yes,
right?
thank you.
But
So let's drill down into this. Let's drill down into this. Because you've just said that according to Islam, you can own another human being as a piece of property. That's what you said.
well,
And it's on camera. Right, 1 second.
no, hold
Are
on,
you
hold on,
proud
hold on,
of that?
Hold on.
No, I want to ask you.
No, hold on.
Are you
Let me
proud?
tell you something.
Are you
Let me
proud
tell
of it?
something. Let me tell you something. I live in a world, okay, as a Muslim, I live in the West. I live in a place where owning a slave is illegal. Okay.
Because of whose influence? Islam or Christianity?
Well, it was not just Christianity.
No, that's
It
not-
It's not just Christianity. It was an amalgamation of
Happening in the
slave
Muslim
trade.
world.
From a historical point of view, first of all,
Is it still happening in the Muslim
I will
world?
answer, but let's have a discussion.
Let's time it. Shall we do 3 minutes? 3 minutes?
You can if you
Yeah,
want to.
because
But I would love to have a discussion
I was supposed
versus
to
a
answer.
debate, because I think we would gain more benefit. Even
yeah,
from
let's
your
have.
I was
You can
supposed to
join.
answer.
You can all join in.
The
even
brother,
from
he
your
just come
perspective,
in.
you will benefit a lot. Because
So, let's time it.
everything that you said, there's truth in it.
1 second. We're going to do 3 minutes. 3 minutes. He's going to have 3 minutes. I'm going to have 3 minutes. Once the 3 minutes are in, you just shout time. You stop. So you have the first 3 minutes. Yeah.
Sure, that's fine.
Okay. Go on. Go.
All I'm saying is this. Look, you said a lot of things, and when I said selective, it doesn't mean it's wrong. Okay? Being selective does not mean that you're telling lies. All I'm saying is that everything that you said about said could also be said about Islam. You know, you talked about patience, that Jesus had patience and forbearance. I could say the same thing about the Prophet Muhammad when he went to Taif and was stoned by kids and children and chastised for 13 years in Mecca without retaliation, without plundering people, right? I could say the same thing. Now, you talked about slavery. Now, slavery is a thing that people like to throw the balls and trying to score points. But you will find that various of societies have been engaged in slavery. You said that that Christianity somehow had an influence on it. Yes, the Quakers had influence on ending on slavery, but there was also economical benefits in ending slavery. We find this that today you can go to a database and you'll find that the ancestors for David Cameron, yeah, they got paid compensation because they freed slavery because of the industrial age that came around the Victorian times. That slavery was not as profitable anymore, and that's why you have the South and East, the South and North divide in America, because there are still people who are holding to traditional values, Christian values also. To say now, am I going to say now that this is inherently a Christian problem? No, it's not, because I look through the lenses of geopolitics, I look through the lenses of sociology, and I look at the lens of history, and you'll find that it's a human condition to oppress. You will find this amongst Muslims, you find this amongst Buddhists, yeah? Hindus had slaves. There's caste systems in Hinduism. These are human conditions, you know. And I try to be honest. I look at things in history, Islamic history, and we will come to this because you talk about the Ottomans. There's deeply problematic issues amongst the Muslims in their history and things they've conducted and things they've done. I'm not going to lie to you about this, but to somehow pin it back to a religion, I could do the same thing with Christianity, and we pretty much in the same boat here.
Wait. So are you done?
Yeah, I'm done.
So no, let me reset. Oh, because I'm talking with him. If he'll be patient.
Thank you.
Okay. So reset, and then I'll do 3 minutes
Is it-
when you're ready.
let me take 2 seconds.
No.
Islam
Yeah. I'm
encourage-
talking with him.
Islam
I'm talking with him.
encourage,
I'm talking with him.
free and slave.
So hold on.
equality between people.
One
Yes,
second.
yes.
I'll wait until. 1 second. Are you ready? Yeah. So my point to you is this. My point to you is this. I know that every group of people in every civilization, from a socio-economic and political viewpoint, have done all the same crimes.
Yeah.
We're all guilty of the same things. Okay?
Yeah.
My point to you is that those things that we would recognize as wrong,
Yeah.
Like the idea that my ancestors may have at some point owned your ancestors as slaves, we would both say is wrong, I assume.
Yeah.
But I can validate that through my example of Jesus.
Yeah.
You cannot validate that argument through your example of Muhammad, because as you have already admitted, Muhammad did have slaves. Muhammad did permit his followers to have slaves. And because you esteem, one second, I did not interrupt.
Apologies.
So, but then what you are saying is Muhammad is the best of examples, which means that which Muhammad did is normative to you. And when we look at the Quran and the Hadiths, what we see in Sahih al-Bukhari is Muhammad sanctioning the use of slavery. We see in the Quran the sanctioned use of slavery. And because you believe that that is eternal for all times and all people and all places, you can't get away from that reality. Brother, can you tell me when I've got 1 minute left, please? Now, my point to you is, if we are saying that in our conscience and in our intellect, we recognize that me owning you as a slave, or you owning me as a slave, is a moral evil, then it follows that our preeminent example, our last example, should be the one that lays the groundwork for that to collapse. But what we see in Islam is quite the opposite. Christianity fought against slavery multiple times. We abolished slavery in England. The first time was in 1068 or 1069. That was centuries before Islam ever abolished slavery. In the Islamic world, the slave trade happens today. Now let me ask you this question in closing, because I'm coming to the end of the minute. Please answer this in your 3 minutes.
Sure.
Are you proud of Muhammad's example, and therefore are you proud that you have the right to own a slave? That's the question I would like you to address. Because as a Christian, using Christ as my example, I could never claim that. So, over to you.
Okay. First of all, when we talk about slavery, we must be very careful that slavery does not manifest itself everywhere the same. Okay, Roman slavery and the rights of the slaves during the Roman times is going to be a totally different reality to the slavery during the Egyptian time. Now, the slavery or the transatlantic slave trade, it cannot be compared to the slave trade that took place amongst the Ottomans. And I'm not saying either of them are better or worse, but I'm just saying the manifestation of it is totally different. Now, when we say slavery, most people would think of Africans being taken, being kidnapped, and taken to the New World, right? And then that's the backdrop that we have, and then we think of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and then we think that he did similar, or that's the slavery that was the manifestation of his time. Now, I can give you hadiths right here on how badly people who weren't Arab or people who weren't associated to particular tribes were treated because they were slaves. Okay? The way I understand Islam, my personal way I understand Islam is that Islam comes to a society and tries to filter out the ills. And equally, if you say to me that a hadith with the Prophet ﷺ, to your interpretation, encourages having slaves, you also have to then say there are also hadiths where the Prophet ﷺ discourages slaves and makes manumission or the freement of slaves a very core activity for people. How does he do that? By telling people that if you free a slave, this is your reward. Thank you. Such and such. Freeing a slave is an equivalent, like you won't never be able to repay your father unless you free a slave, for example, things like that. There's many things in the Quran as for encouragement of freeing people from this bondage. So Islam comes into a time where, as you said, it's normative. It tries to filter out all the ills of it. However, you need to understand that 7th century Arabia is a place where tribes subjugate and wars and fight, and these things are just a reality that did not change during the lifetime of the Prophet, clearly. 2 minutes. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I didn't answer your question, by the way.
You didn't. No, yeah,
can I
no,
add to him?
bro, no, because we're doing a time debate. So when you're ready. So the fact of the matter is, if Islam came to filter out the ill and to build up the good, it has failed, because in 1400 years. Islam never stopped slavery until it was pressured to, the Islamic world was pressured to by the Western world.
Perfect.
It was the Western world that pushed the Islamic world into abolishing slavery. There was no internal movement within the Islamic world to abolish slavery. There never has been, and there never will be. Because if you say that you're going to abolish slavery, you're going to have to say that Muhammad did things that were wrong, and therefore he isn't the best example. Let me just give you some examples of Muhammad. Sahih al-Muslim, book 015, number 4122. Sorry, 4112. Imran B. Hussein reported that a person who had no other property emancipated 6 slaves of his at the time of his death. Allah's messenger, may peace be upon him, called for them and divided them into 3 sections, cast lots amongst them and set 2 free and kept 4 in slavery.
Hold on, you said...
No, 1 second, don't interrupt. I did not interrupt you. No, don't interrupt. Don't interrupt.
I don't understand that.
Bro, don't interrupt. I did not interrupt you. Muhammad had people that were set free and he put them back into slavery. That's your example. This is what Muhammad did. Sahih al-Bukhari, volume 3, book 41, hadith number 598, narrated by Jabir. A man manumitted, that means to release, manumitted a slave, and he had no other property than that. So the Prophet cancelled the manumission. He cancelled the release of the slave and had him brought back into slavery and sold the slave for him. Here's another example of Muhammad, narrated by Anas bin Malik in Sahih Bukhari, volume 8, book 80, number 753. The Prophet said, "The freed slave belongs to the people who have freed him." So even when you're set free, you're still owned in the wider context by the slave owners. The reality is that Christians were fighting against slavery in the classical period. They would sell, I'll give you some examples, and in my next 3 minutes I'll give you examples. We abolished slavery in England in the 10th century. In the 10th century, that's when the Islamic slave trade was ramping up. You talked about Janissaries and the Ottoman Empire. Let me tell you what it looked like for my people, the Christian peoples of Eastern Europe. The Ottoman Turk would ride in and demand our children. Can you imagine someone coming up to you and saying, "Give me your child as a payment for a tax"? Because they couldn't pay the jizya tax, the Ottoman Turk, the Ottoman Muslim, came into Christian villages and took their children as payment. And who else did that? Muhammad did that, and I'll show you that as well. Now let me ask you that. Do you agree with taking people and distributing them as the possessions amongst the believers? So you've got two questions. Are you proud of your right to own another human being as a piece of property? Are you proud of it? 2, do you agree with the idea of distributing people amongst the believers as possessions like your Prophet did?
Okay. How long is left?
3.5.
Have I still got a bit of time? Okay, your turn.
Okay. So he asked me if I am proud to own slaves, right? That's what you said.
You're proud of your right to own slaves.
Right to own slaves. Okay, good. Okay, and then you also said that the second question was, can you say?
The second question was, do you agree with the idea of taking human beings and distributing them amongst the believers as property like your Prophet did?
Okay, so my understanding of Islam and its law and the way it's understood is not static. So I'm not someone who believes that because there was a time where people were doing that, that I have to necessarily do that, and that's somehow my attendance of me entering paradise. That's not what Islam for me is. I look at Islam and I understand Islam in a context of the zeitgeist I'm living in. I live right now in the UK. I'm originally from Africa. I live in the UK. And
let him talk, bro. Let him talk.
Now, of course, you're going to have things like that. Uninformed, ignorant statements like there's only one Islam. But when you look at the classical scholars and contemporary scholars, they come to different conclusions because there's additional information, there are changes in politics, changes in the way people perceive certain things. And that's how I see that. So your question is, you are now forcing me to go back to the 7th century and sort of apply that to my life, when the context of the 7th century I don't live in. So that's how I would answer that.
1 minute.
The other thing that you're saying as well is that your problem clearly is that the Prophet Muhammad was owning slaves, right? And again, I look at it in terms of a believer, first and foremost, but I also look at it as in terms of a historian. That's what was happening at that time, right? He was saying about Islam failed because it never abolished slavery. Now, I've never claimed that Islam came to abolish slavery, but it came to regulate, possibly, and to get rid of the ills as much as possible, as much as society allows it to happen. And kudos to the Christians and the Quakers who got rid of slavery. But
okay, time.
Yeah.
Time. Right.
Yeah.
So let us be clear.
Yeah.
You're ducking, and I don't blame you.
That's fine if you think that. That's
Because well, I didn't interrupt you. Don't interrupt me.
Yeah.
You're ducking because you can't just stand here and say you're proud of Muhammad.
I can say that.
No, well, I didn't interrupt you.
Yeah.
You had the opportunity to say that you're proud of your right to own slaves, and you didn't. Because Muhammad
Why
gives...
do I have to do that?
Why are you interrupting?
Yeah, no.
Why are you interrupting? I didn't interrupt you. Can I start my 3 minutes again, please? Okay, so you had the opportunity to stand here and said, I am proud of the rights that Muhammad gives to me to own another human being as a piece of property, but you didn't. And the reason why you didn't, bro, is because your conscience is better than the conscience of your prophet. And I don't blame you, but that should be telling you something. If you can't look at Muhammad and say the liberties that he has given me, I am proud of, and the restrictions that he has given me, I am proud of, then he's not worth following. I can stand here and say that I am proud of Jesus Christ. And I am proud of the example that he gives me. Where he gives me liberty, I want to live in that liberty. Where he gives me restriction, I want to live in that restriction. And that is a better example to you. Because I am yet to find a person that can find a problem with Jesus. But I find plenty of problems with Muhammad. That's actually the reason why I rejected Islam and became a Christian. The reason why I became a Christian is because a Muslim tried to convert me to Islam. And when I compared Muhammad to Jesus, stop interrupting. Pause my time, please.
Matthew 15, 22, 28, where the Canaanian woman was referred to her as a dog.
We're just going to have to wait until he's finished.
As a dog. And this is, he's talking about Jesus in another place. Jesus talking to people, he loved only the Jew, and he called non-Jew dogs and pigs. He ignores that, and he don't like to be interrupted, but he can interrupt and tell you to shut up. Please, carry on.
Okay, so we'll start my time again. And please note it.
No, again.
No, let him start again. Let him.
So
let him take consideration.
No, not again. We'll have you paused
answer this. Matthew 15, 22, 28, exactly 26, where he said to the woman, "It's not bread."
Can you stop being rude?
No, you told me.
So, as I was saying, I look at Jesus, and where he gives me liberty, I want to follow in that liberty.
Yeah.
Where he gives me restraint, I want to follow in that restraint. And I can stand here and say I'm 100% behind that.
Yeah.
So I'll ask you again, are you proud of your right to own another human being as a piece of property.
Yeah.
Now, furthermore, there are hadiths where Muhammad took people that were captured in war and distributed them amongst the believers. Are you aware of those hadiths?
Yeah, I am.
Am I lying about that?
No.
No, those are
They
real
will do
things.
the same
So
for-
Muhammad did
non-Muslims,
that.
they will do the
Do
same
you
with
believe?
women-
Do
with
you
Muslim
believe
women.
that you
If they-
have the
they,
right?
have to
That
win.
Muslims have the right to take other human beings and distribute
The
them as
non-Muslim will do the
property
same for the
amongst
Muslim
the
women.
believers when
If
you
they
are
are to
victorious in
be
war. That's
win
another
in a
question.
battle.
Now
This
you'll have
is
to
my
forgive me
answer for
because
you.
he wasn't interrupting you. He's just
No,
interrupting
I'm
me.
interrupting you
So
because
my point,
the rule go
my
on
point,
Muslim and non-Muslim.
my point
and you should take
is
it in
that
consideration.
I gave 9 theses as to why I reject Islam.
Yeah.
The example of Muhammad is one of them.
Yeah.
The other example we've already alluded to,
Yeah.
which is that Islam claims to solve society's problems, but it couldn't even solve the problem of slavery, even when it had years to do so, and even when it controlled huge tracts of land without any real opposition.
You don't say
the
that-
Islamic
let me
empires
interrupt him. Let me
stood for
interrupt him.
over 1,000 years.
Yeah.
They were the dominant force and they couldn't stop slavery.
Yeah.
But at the same period, Christians were stopping slavery in their lands, even before Islam. In the Byzantine Empire, in the 5th century, slavery was being stopped. In England, in the 11th century, slavery was being stopped. In Italy, in France, at the same time that the Islamic empires were ramping up their slave trade, the Christian kingdoms were abolishing slavery. And that is because Islam failed to deal with slavery, whereas Christianity did deal with slavery. Now,
Okay. That's it now. 5.
is it 3 minutes? So my final point,
Yeah.
so my 2 questions again.
Yeah.
One, are you proud
Yeah.
of your right to own another human being as a piece of property? This brother says yes. And 2, do you agree with the right to take people you've captured in war and distribute them as property to the believers?
Yeah. Okay. Now this man is asking me a question and he wants a particular answer. He wants me to say yes, I'm proud. Proud of what? Proud of owning slaves. Now I've already explained to you. I've already explained to you. Look, the way you understand Islam is not the way I understand Islam. Okay.
Can you shut up and don't interrupt me?
Pause his time.
Can you shut up? Yeah, shut up.
When you're ready,
because
just ask him to start.
Now
I will shut my fucking mouth if you shut as well. You fucking idiot.
Carry on. Yeah.
now that's what you were talking.
Just talk to them.
Yeah. Okay. Now, Bob, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, Bob, I've already said to you, my answer is nuanced. I'm saying to you, yeah, that you are asking me to answer a question that is extremely specific. You are talking about the Prophet Muhammad SAW owning slaves, live in the 7th century, having to fight tribes, having to fight enemies, having to defend people, having to go to battle. I've never been in a battle. I've never been into a battle, right? I've never been amongst groups.
Keep going.
I've never been amongst groups who've done such things. Now, I can't answer that. I can't say I'm proud of that because it does not apply to my life. Now, if we were in a time, okay, where there would be battles and wars and I happen to be a Muslim and the conditions are there for me to be there, I would probably answer in affirmative. I'd be like, look, this is the context that I live in. This is what happens in war. Yes, I am proud. Besides that, I am proud of the Prophet Muhammad SAW, for who he is and for what he stands for. The second question, what was the second question? Sorry, what was the second question? The second question was,
do you believe that
distribution.
captured people in war can be distributed
Yeah.
as property to the believers,
Okay,
Muslim believers?
Okay, you see, that's a very nuanced question that you're asking me. Now, we live in a time today where there's international laws, where there's sovereign countries. When you say that, are you saying a sovereign country going to another sovereign country and doing that? Or are you saying that I'm part of a vigilante group like ISIS and then I insert myself in the Middle East when there's a vacuum because there's a civil war, I happen to be a part of that group, then I would say no. So you see, the question that you're asking me are very nuanced, because we live, again, because it's specific to the time that we live in. I live in a place where there's nation states, the economical blocks like the EU and America and China, where there's international laws that rule now. Now, if you ask me now, I can't, unless I'm part of a vigilante group that I disagree with from the get-go. So that's how I'm going to answer, and if you don't like it, I'm sorry.
Can I reply? Are you done?
Yeah.
Okay. Ready when you are?
Apologies for interrupting.
It's alright, don't worry about it. What's your name, bro?
Dawood.
Dawood, as we can see, is weaving. And I don't blame him. I asked him a very simple question. Muhammad gives Dawood the right to own another human being as a piece of property, and he doesn't want to say he is proud of the right that Muhammad gave to him. And the reason, but the brother behind him is proud. Either way, we have a problem. Either way, we have a problem. If you are stood here or can hear my voice, any human being who says that he is proud of the right to own another human being has a conscience that is deformed from the good. They have a conscience that is corrupted and evil. And if you agree with me, then you disagree with Muhammad, because Muhammad gave you that right. Now, you said that you can't ask me to be proud of something in the 21st century that was applicable in the 7th century. But the reality is, the whole point of Islam is that we go back to a 7th century Arab and say that he is the best example to follow and imitate him in what he does in his implementation of the Quran. So let's look at what the Quran says. Here's something that the Quran says. Quran 33, ayah 50. O Prophet, indeed we have made lawful to you your wives, to whom you have given their due compensation, and, did everyone hear the and means in addition to, so more than your wives, also permitted to you, or those your right hands possess. That is a phrase that is talking about slaves. So permitted for the Muslims to have sex with are their wives and their slave women. The Quran is said by Muslims like Dawood to be an eternal book, a guidance to the whole of mankind, which means that this is something applicable to the 21st century. So I will ask you again, Dawood, according to the guidance of the Quran, not the example of a 7th century nomadic prophet, but the Quran's statement that you can own people with your right hand as a possession. Are you proud of what the Quran says that you can do? By contrast, Christianity does not sanction slavery. And why is that? How many minutes have I got? Have I done? I'll have to come back to it.
Okay, look, and this is actually for the viewers, right? Because what has happened for a very long time is that we have loads of people who like to talk about things, right? And I think it reflects the politics in this country at this very time as well. That we have lay people and incredibly huge, knowledge or Islam, history, sociology, all these things been democratically open so that everyone can talk about it, and nuances don't exist anymore, and we live in a time of absolutes, and that's probably why populism is doing is alive and well. Now, for the people actually and how Islam is practiced and how scholars traditionally have applied laws. Okay, the Quran is a book that we believe is from God, and it came down in its revelation, and it's in response to, or a reaction and react, and it's sometimes proactive, sometimes it's reactive. Now, what I'm trying to say to him, like the last 3 minutes, is that if you ask me today slavery. Let's define what slavery is. Slavery is a system. Slavery predicates a system. There has to be a system. Now you're asking, okay, a African man who is in the UK, whether he would be proud to own a slave. I'm telling you, I don't even have the environment. There's not even an environment for me to have slaves. Okay, I'm an average guy. I'm not saying that slavery does not exist. It does exist in its life in the world. But I'm saying I am an average guy. I live in a system where there's no slavery. There's no need for slavery. There is a leeway for me as a Muslim to say, you know what? I don't need, and I'm not in need of slavery, nor do I condone slavery, and it doesn't make me any less Muslim. The Islamic law, the Sharia that you were talking about earlier on, is an extremely flexible system that adapts to its environment, in its context and its zeitgeist. And that's something that once we can understand that, then I'm not, like you want to pin me down, to static understanding on how jurisprudence is understood. Jurisprudence is a study, is an area that is live or not static.
Sorry. It's important to see this. These are real people really going for this. Forget about the word ISIS.
What I'm saying, at the time
Sorry.
of the Prophet,
Okay.
if
I'll hold that
there was
book
a tribe
for a moment.
who
Can I
was
hold that book?
fighting
In my
against
next
the
3
Prophet,
minutes, I'll hold that book.
and they took
Yeah.
Muslim women as
So my 3
as a
minutes
spoil
now.
for war.
Notice that Dawood said how the scholars apply it traditionally. For 1400 years there has been an Islamic slave trade, and it has never ended. Ever. Islam failed. If you say that slavery was wrong and Islam came to abolish that which was wrong, then Islam is a failure, because Islam never abolished the slave trade. By contrast, and it didn't just fail in its failure to get rid of the slave trade, it failed in the caliphate. The caliphate doesn't even exist anymore. The reality is, Dawood, when he suits him, is saying, I don't want to follow Muhammad's example. And when it doesn't suit him, when it does suit him, he says he wants to follow Muhammad's example. By contrast, Christians like Saint Ovidius would sell, this is in the classical period, so this is in the Roman period, would sell themselves into slavery and then would use the money that they raised to free slaves. Christians like the Mennonite brothers, during the European slavery, went to the Caribbean to preach the gospel to slaves. They wanted to sell themselves into slavery so that they could share the suffering of the slaves. Now, regardless of these individual examples that we can point to, it boils down to the paradigm of Muhammad or Jesus. Jesus never had slaves, and he is my example. The Old Testament talks about slavery, much like the Quran talks about slavery. But we Christians understand the Bible through a covenant paradigm, which means that the old covenant law doesn't carry into the new covenant law, except and as the new covenant law transforms and embraces it. And nowhere in the new covenant can slavery be justified.
Perfect.
However, Islam in the Quran, verse after verse, justifies slavery. Muhammad justifies slavery. That is the example that Dawood faces. And his conscience is telling him that it isn't Muhammad that is the best example, but that it is Jesus Christ. History tells us that the caliphate set up by Muhammad doesn't exist anymore, but the church founded by Jesus does. So that which was established by Jesus has stood the test of time, and that which was established by Muhammad has not stood the test of time.
Are we done? Okay, so first of all, you said something at the beginning. You said that so Islam came and it has basically failed to abolish slavery in 1,400 years, and it's still going on. Well, if I was to use the same example that you're using, then Christianity has failed, because we actually know today that global slavery and human trafficking is as big as it's never been, and there's various societies who are involved in it. In North America alone, which today prides itself to be based upon Christian Judeo values, has thousands and thousands of children being kidnapped into sex trafficking, which is a form of slavery also. So based upon that, but I'm not using it, I'm just using it to show you how he rationalizes. I don't rationalize like that. I'm not going to say Christianity has failed because of that. You keep going back to the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire approximately existed for 1,000 years or 900 years, don't quote me on that, and ceased to exist for like less than 200 years. Now that's your equivalent of what's it called, a nation or an empire failing. And again, it shows me really that you're illiterate when it comes to history and your understanding of history, that empires do exist, they come back, and they come and they exist in different forms. Now the other thing that you need to understand is this: there's a hadith where the Prophet Muhammad actually prophesied it. He said there will come a time where you will have a king, and then you will have a ruler, and then you will have politicians ruling. And I'm just paraphrasing this hadith. The hadith basically is commenting on what? It's commenting on different types of governance that the Muslims will live unto the day of judgment. So we were foretold that there will, that the caliphate, the way we know. So yeah, that's one thing. So to say that Islam has failed, first of all, I've never claimed ever before Islam came to abolish. The word abolishing means cease to exist, an effort to remove slavery. Why? Because with history, you will find, and it seems like we're going back in history again with the wave of far-right politics that has taken hold of countries in Europe, especially in this country. You will see that in history, it's not a linear understanding of history, rather it's secular. So things that might not apply today, where there is no wars and there's no civil wars and there's no slavery, could be looking different in 50 years. And Islam, like I said to you, is this: it's a religion that comes to weed out the evil and to regulate human conditions that we cannot deny.
So let me reply to this, because he keeps trying to talk about politics, and the reality is there is no more sort of white flag signal than when someone tries to draw in politics when we're talking about the religious system. We're talking about the example of Muhammad and the example of Jesus and the paradigms that those establish. Muslims, as he has just admitted, have not abolished slavery. They haven't come to abolish slavery. Islam isn't here to abolish slavery, to have slaves. Islam permits him to have slaves. And in terms of having those slaves, what we have is a problem. We have a problem of a system that will license the owning of other human beings as a moral good. Let me give you an example, quoting another hadith, another example of Muhammad. And I want you to commentate on this example. So among them was a woman from the Banu Fazara. She was wearing a leather coat. With her was her daughter, who was one of the prettiest girls in Arabia. I drove them along until I brought them to Abu Bakr, who bestowed that girl upon me as a prize. So we arrived in Medina. I had not yet disrobed her. This is one of Muhammad's followers. I had not yet disrobed her when the messenger of Allah, may peace be upon him, met me in the street and said, "Give me that girl, O Salama." I said, "O messenger of Allah, she has fascinated me. I had not yet disrobed her." When on the next day the messenger of Allah, may peace be upon him, again met me in the street, he said, "O Salama, give me that girl. May God bless your father. I said, she is for you. Messenger of Allah, by Allah, I have not yet disrobed her. The Messenger of Allah, may peace be upon him, sent her to the people of Mecca and surrendered her as a ransom for a number of Muslims who had been kept as prisoners at Mecca. Now please notice that the Muslim is appealing to Muhammad for the permission to disrobe his captured slave. The woman had just seen her fathers and her brothers and her cousins die, her people destroyed, her relatives enslaved. Do you think she wanted to have sex with him? Do you agree with Muhammad when he brought people back into slavery who had been released from slavery and used human beings as part of wider diplomatics?
Okay. So basically he said to, just before he started, he said, why is it that I bring politics into it? Why am I bringing all these other elements that...
Okay, we'll make this the last round.
Yeah. So he just said to me, what he said to the camera just a minute ago, why is it that I'm bringing all these other elements to this debate? I'm doing this because reality is just that complex. Humans, human history, and events are not just purely driven of theology, which obviously he's banking on. There's politics that is involved in it, and there are other things that are involved in it. And that's why I'm bringing these things, because it's just that holistic. Secondly, this hadith that you mentioned before, just by the sound of it, because you brought this hadith without an explanation and you just left it there, I find him extremely strange. I find him extremely strange hadiths, and I do not know the authenticity of it, so I cannot comment on it. The other thing that you said was that I find a fallacy. You said that you mentioned all these classical Christians who were freeing slaves, but yet in the 15th century you still have slavery persistent by Christians. In the 18th century, 19th century, in this country, husbands were selling their women, and that's less than 300 years ago. So yes, you can be. We celebrate what humankind has achieved, and totally. And I don't see this as a West-East divide. That's not how I understand history. History is an obligation of societies and influences like politics that you're trying to run away from. I'm just saying to the viewer, look, understand reality holistically. What he's doing is dog whistling. He's throwing all these things and he's keep going back to these points. But he doesn't actually go on to what I'm saying. When I was trying to explain to you, for example, the nuance on how classical scholars, contemporary scholars, even lawmakers, secular lawmakers, when they make laws, how nuanced their approach is when they pass laws.
My reply?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, this man over here, he brought a book where there was ISIS on it. And this is what I'm trying to say.
No. I've got a book with a woman.
Yeah.
A Yazidi woman.
Yeah. They will see.
A Yazidi woman. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Brother, let him finish, please.
And I also said,
Please.
I also said, I'm not worried about the name. I'm saying these are real people.
That's fine. Understand? No. Please, we're in a debate. I just pointed at you.
One more thing.
No.
Just
please.
like the women in Muhammad's time, this is a real woman.
No. Thank you very much. So, this is the perfect example. Sorry, would you pause it because he interrupted? This is the example that I'm trying to say why. No, I just pointed at you.
Just give him a minute. Just give him a minute.
Why your understanding of this situation.
Bro, just go on with your minute.
Yeah. Why this book and his understanding of what is happening in the Middle East is limited and it's not holistic enough. Now, ISIS or whatever, call what you want, is a vigilante group that is not supported by no government. In fact, there are certain people who say they're supported by Western and other entities in the Middle East as proxy wars, right? These things are not happening under state-ruled or state-sanctioned activities. These are groups just like neo-Nazis with an ammunition power of an army. We go into places and enslave human beings and kill human beings. And those people let's not isolate that it was only the Yazidi women who been killed here. There's plenty of Muslim or enslaved. Even that.
Just keep going.
But there are also millions, upper millions of Muslim who've been killed by these groups. Now we have to distinguish that this
Time. So I'm going to do a wrap up, because Dawood is trying to conflate politics with religion. What I am pointing out is the politics of Muhammad. This is the politics of Muhammad. Muhammad had the opportunity to abolish slavery. Muhammad had the opportunity to tell his followers, free all your slaves. Muhammad had the opportunity to say it is not permissible to you to buy or sell slaves. I mean, he did it with alcohol, and he did it with bacon. If you can do it with alcohol and bacon, you can do it with human beings. But he didn't. And he didn't because it didn't suit him to do so. And the fact is that for 1400 years, since the time of Muhammad, Muslims have peninsula. It's not like the Byzantines successfully invaded it, or the Crusaders successfully invaded it. The Muslims owned it all to themselves for 1400 years, and in the entirety of that time, they never stopped slavery. Why? Because they had no legitimate reason to from an Islamic perspective.
Perfect.
But every single century I can point to Christians fighting against slavery, including in the time when Christians were committing slavery. Christians abolished slavery in this country, Dawood, in the 11th century.
So why did it continue?
It started again. It's something different. Because of the Enlightenment. Because Christians in Europe started to abandon their faith. And as they started to abandon their faith because of the Enlightenment, that's when you see slavery start again. It's as Europe moves away from Christianity that you start to see slavery re-emerge. If you knew European history, you would know that, but you don't. Correct. I did not interrupt you. I did not interrupt you.
In the 16th century, we were Christians.
I did not interrupt you. So, my point to you is, Dawood, you've asked on multiple occasions, are you proud of the rights that Muhammad gave you? You dodged the question.
I've answered it.
Well, the cameras will see. I had to ask you multiple times. You haven't answered that question. I am proud of the example of Jesus. Every right that he has given me, I want to celebrate and do. And everything that he has prohibited me, I want to stop doing. Muhammad gave Muslims the right to own other people as property according to Sharia law, and you couldn't say you were proud of that, and that is your conscience telling you you need a better prophet, and his name is Jesus.
Why are you not actually saying what I said to you? It's like almost ignoring it. It's not good.
Tell me you're proud. Tell me you're proud of the right to own people as property.
But why?
Can you please, this is about slavery. Can you please read about it?
Yeah, next week you can talk to him. Look.
Tell me you're proud of it.
Look.
Tell me you're proud to own another human being as a piece of property.
Criteria for me? Why are you setting criteria? Why am I supposed to follow your criteria?
Okay.
To begin with.
This is an Islamic criteria.
Huh?
Muhammad gave you the right to own another human being as a piece of property.
Okay.
Are you proud of that right?
So if I don't do it, I'm not a Muslim. Is that what you're implying?
No, I'm just asking you if you're proud of it.
No, but that's what I'm trying to say to you. I'm saying to you, it's not necessary for me to be proud of it.
Are you proud of the right?
It's not necessary for me. It does not make me a Muslim. It does not define my religion and my belief to God.
So Muhammad doesn't define your religion?
It's not necessary.
Muhammad doesn't define your religion?
Slavery and its laws that came with it are reactionary.
You have just said, Muhammad,
provisional.
You have just said that it is not necessary to your religion.
It's not necessary for me to believe
is
that
Is Muhammad your normative example?
Yeah.
Did Muhammad have slaves?
Yeah, but
did Muhammad trade in slaves?
The Prophet Muhammad had also 7 wives. Am I allowed to have 7 wives because of that? No.
Are you permitted to have slaves?
I am. If I live in a context where it is, I am. Yes.
Are you proud of that right?
Why should I be proud of it if it's not applying to me?
Brother, can't you hear your conscience? The
not my
reason why you
conscience,
can't
it's not
say it
no.
is because your conscience is telling you you need a better prophet.
Okay, no, I'm not saying that. Look, I'm just trying to explain to you is this. Look, I've already actually answered your question. I said, look, if I live in a scenario where it's normative, then yes, of course I'm going to be proud.
And who makes it normative?
I'm not going to society.
And what dominates that society if it's Islamic?
Well, it's not just Islamic.
No, hold on.
It's not just Islamic.
If you've just said society normalizes it,
Yeah,
I agree
yeah,
with you.
yeah.
So if Islam is the dominant force in society,
Yeah.
then slavery becomes normative.
Possibly, not always.
Right. Do you not see a problem with that?
Well, why? Why would
You talked about ISIS. You said that they're this rogue vigilante group.
Yeah.
They had slaves. The Ottoman Empire had slaves.
Yeah.
Muhammad had slaves. Do
Yeah.
you see the line there?
Yeah.
So when ISIS do it, is it wrong?
It's wrong because
When the Ottomans do it, is it wrong?
no, but hold on. Are you comparing ISIS
No,
to the
no.
Ottomans?
Yes.
How?
When I'm on slavery. When
Not on
ISIS.
slavery, because
No, you don't know. I'm doing it using slavery. When ISIS kidnapped Christians and had them as slaves, is it wrong or right?
it was wrong.
When the Ottoman Empire kidnapped Christians and made them slaves, is it wrong or right?
There's probably some cases where it was wrong. Yes.
Probably. So there are some cases where it was right. Right. So there you go. That's the problem of Islam. And why do you say it's right? Because when Muhammad did it, was it right or wrong? When Muhammad did it, was it right or wrong?
I'm saying.
When Muhammad did it,
Let me
Dawood,
answer the first question
was
with
it
the
right or
Ottomans.
wrong?
Let me ask it with the Ottomans.
You did. You said it was all right.
Yeah, but let me explain why. But the reason why is because the Ottomans was an autonomous state that was respected throughout the globe.
No, they weren't respected. They were hated.
Yes, they were.
They were hated.
They were respected throughout the
They
globe.
were hated.
So you're telling me about all these travelogues of these diplomats who went to the Ottoman periods are like what made up?
The Ottomans were seen as enemy
That's
of
possible.
countless cultures,
That's
of countless
possible.
peoples.
That's-
They were a despised empire
No, that's
because they were a
No, that's
despicable
not
empire.
true. So what? That's not true. So what
What
about?
about the Roman
So
Roman
what?
Empire?
So what about
They was not?
Hold on. What about Elizabethan England then? Queen Elizabeth, she was in alliance with the Moroccans, who in turn were in alliance with the Ottomans. So that's what I'm trying to say. You have to be very careful how you portray history. Another thing, the Ottomans weren't possibly not liked because they're the enemy or they're their rivals. Who likes their rivals anyway? But that doesn't take away.
We're talking
that
about
doesn't
the
take
Ottoman slave trade.
No, hold on.
That's what we're talking
we can't
about.
Just talk about
Why
one
do you
thing
want
in
to talk about
isolation.
everything?
No, why? Do you know why?
ISIS
No,
do it, it's
hold on,
wrong.
hold on.
The Ottomans
Let
do
me
it, it's
finish
right.
this.
The reason why I'm not talking about isolated elements like systems like slavery is because slavery predicates not only on slavery itself. Slavery is a system that is based upon it's supported by church, it's supported by
the
governments,
caliphate.
and it's supported by policymakers.
By Muhammad.
You said that
Muhammad was a policymaker.
You said that slavery.
Muhammad was a policymaker.
Thank you very much. You said that Christianity or that slavery emerged with the Enlightenment period. Now explain to me. In 1659, when the first settlers settled in the south of North America, Protestant settlers. Pietism was their religion. Calvinists, who owned slaves. The founding fathers, deeply religious men, who believed that it was the natural cause to own slaves.
When Muhammad had
That's
slaves, was it
one,
right or wrong?
When Muhammad had slaves, it was right, yeah.
So when Muhammad took slaves
Ephesians.
back into slavery that their masters had released, was that right or wrong?
I
5.
do not, I don't agree.
Ephesians
I don't know,
6:5.
that hadith sounds
You
very
don't
strange.
agree, do you?
No, the hadith
In
sounds
your
very
heart,
strange. The hadith sounds
Dawood,
strange.
they're Sahih Muslim and Sahih Al-Bukhari.
Exodus.
So what?
Now, so what?
21,
Do you remember one of my other reasons? 1
11.
second. So, right, let's just move back a bit. Let's just move back a bit. Move back. Come with me, Dawood. Move back a bit.
46.
Move back a bit. Move back a bit. Move back a bit. Move back a bit. Right. There we go. Dawood. Right? You're saying. Remember, one of my other reasons for rejecting Islam is that even
Prophet
when we
have
use
servant, not slave.
Sahih Hadith,
The Prophet
like Sahih Muslim
have servant,
and
not
Sahih
slave.
Al-Bukhari, that I said you remember because you were listening in, I know you were.
Yeah, I was.
Yeah? I said that we see Muslims chuck those hadith under the bus.
Yeah.
I quoted Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih al-Muslim about Muhammad taking slaves back into slavery. And you want to reject Sahih hadith. And the reason why you want to reject
wanna do
Sahih
that.
hadith, but that's what you're doing.
Because
No,
Quran
that is what you're doing.
Those particular ones, I do not know.
Exactly,
Because Quran-
exactly.
I do not know.
You're
Because the Quran
embarrassed by your own
encourages-
hadith.
I don't know.
They are Sahih Muslim, Sahih al-Bukhari.
Bukhari
Either
came
throw them
after the
away
Prophet
and
died.
throw Muhammad along with them,
Yeah.
or embrace them and say you're proud of the example of Muhammad.
Can I-
But Muhammad,
The Prophet
Muhammad
encouraged freedom and slavery.
took slaves back into slavery that had been released
This
by their
contradiction
masters.
to the
Was that
Quran, which
right
is
or
wrong.
wrong?
Okay.
It's wrong.
Okay.
It's wrong. Because
You
Quran
need Jesus,
encouraged-
Yahweh.
encouraged-
You need Jesus,
to
Yahweh.
free as a
May I
slave.
say something?
And that's why
You-
the
you-
Prophet
you
was
basically said to me
fought
that-
by others.
Habibi,
No, Habibi.
you can look. This man knows you. This man knows your name. Which
I was
means,
supposed to talk to him,
I
and
know,
you
but
come
he-
along.
yeah, and he
and
didn't
he
wanna-
just
he didn't wanna
he's
talk to
just
you.
using you,
Okay,
using you for
no,
whatever
Come on,
he
Dawud.
wants.
You just have to go, press on with the hecklers.
Yeah, press on.
I do it every week.
okay, you said
Yeah.
Sahih Hadith, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now I don't know if you know this. You probably know, maybe not. Look, the Hadith. Have you checked the isnad?
Are you about to
No,
say
no,
that?
hold on. Have you checked the isnad of the thing?
Right, a Sahih hadith.
No. Please answer what I said to you. Did you check the isnad of the Hadith?
No, I trust.
Okay. Did you know?
Did Sahih a Muslim check the isnad?
No. Did you know?
Did Bukhari
you-
and Muslim check the isnad?
Okay, but did you know that also? Yeah, there are certain. There are,
So sorry to disturb you guys. I'm going to pray. Can you keep
Yeah.
an eye on this talk?
Did you know that there are well-established hadith that everyone says is sahih? And
Yeah.
it's in Muslim and it's in Bukhari.
Yeah.
And then when you go into the isnad and you see, oh, it's disconnected. So I.
Don't you see that proves my point?
No, it doesn't prove your point.
What was
Let
my
me
point
finish,
about the
let me
hadith?
finish,
Go on,
let me
Dawud.
finish.
Go on. Sorry.
The point I'm trying to
I
make.
apologize.
Yeah,
Now I apologize. Yeah.
the point I'm trying to make is the hadith, yeah, on its own itself sounds strange because I know that the Prophet Muhammad SAW would encourage, plenty of times in the seerah you find that he would encourage the manumission of slaves, himself freeing slaves. Aisha radhiyallahu anha, she's known to have freed 200 slaves just on her own, Aisha. Now, strange. I'm not saying it's not true. Okay, I'm not saying you lying. I'm just saying I find it strange. Therefore, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back and do my homework, right? So there was something else that you said. I forgot. Sorry.
Okay, so let me reply to what you're saying. Because you're proving another point. If you remember when you were listening in, I said that Muslims can't agree about which hadiths are reliable. And
Yeah,
that
to an extent.
even
To an
when
extent.
we use the hadiths that they say are reliable, like the Sahih hadiths, which are checked by Bukhari and Muslim, who check the isnads and check the matin and do the whole hadith science, that even today Muslims will chuck those hadiths under the bus. They will distance themselves from those hadiths because they find them embarrassing or they find them against their own conscience. And that is what Dawood is doing right now. He is distancing himself from Sahih Muslim hadith and Sahih Bukhari hadith, in which Muhammad told that slaves who had been released by their masters needed to be taken back into slavery. And the reason why he is doing so, Dawood, is because you are a better man than your prophet, and you know that if these hadiths are true, then Muhammad was a horrible man, and you don't want to be a horrible man, and I applaud you for it, but I say that you should follow
Jesus.
that logic out of Islam to a better example, the paradigm of Jesus Christ. Because
People
if you're
think
saying
themselves.
that even your Sahih hadiths you cannot trust,
No, I didn't say that.
Hadith
I didn't
is
say
not
that.
holy.
you're saying that
The
they
Quran is
sound
holy.
suspicious.
Yeah, that sounds strange.
Right, but the point of the matter is,
Oh, no.
my friend, these are hadith. This is your literature I'm using.
The hadith comes 200 years after
Identified
the death
by
of
your
Prophet.
scholars
It's false.
that you say
In the Old
were the
Testament.
amazing people
Yeah.
who collected these hadiths, and they're called Sahih for a reason. What does Sahih
book
mean
is
for the
Sahih, not
camera?
every single hadith.
Authentic.
Not
like-
every single
Authentic.
hadith.
Authentic, trustworthy.
Yeah, but some
there
of
you
them,
go.
they
But you
are
don't
not-
want to trust it, do you?
No,
Not all of them. There's 7,000 hadiths.
I'm talking to
You cannot-
Dawood.
I'm talking to you.
All I was saying, yeah.
Yeah.
All I was saying is
There's 7,000
I just wanna
hadiths.
open up a
It's
bit the
impossible
understanding of what
that all
Sahih is
hadiths
and this
are
and that.
right.
There are different.
There must be false
You know there are different
and
books,
authentic
right?
and
every scholar has
fabricated.
its. That's why that's the differences, and that's why some people don't agree. Because every scholar has its own methodology
Incest.
and
Even the
tolerance
children,
how
even the
to
children.
look at hadith.
grow up
First
to
of
be
all,
like
Even the donkeys.
Because they were.
I don't.
JC, you're getting involved in the argument again, bro. Let
He's not picking up my sister.
okay,
Oh, sorry.
go on.
So I'm not denying the hadith. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm not wrong. And I'm not. On the reason why I'm saying that they sound strange. I should actually take that back. They don't sound strange, but what they do is they.
Content. Why devil?
From the little knowledge I have, it does not seem consistent with the Prophet, and also they seem very surface based. What do I mean by that? Every hadith, I would love to read this hadith with commentary, and I would love to read the hadith with its historical context. Okay, what happened? Why did the Prophet say that? All this hadith is saying right now is just telling you there was a situation where there was someone was freeing slaves, and the Prophet came and said like, no, free those two and those two. That's all it's saying. It's just that. But I want to know why and the background maybe, and then I can come back to you and be like, oh, so the hadith, the reason why that was the reason is because those two other slaves were taken forcefully from someone else. You know, I'm speculating, but I'm saying that there could be another reason why that happened that way. So I just want to look at the hadith. I'm not denying them. If they're Sahih, we say they're Sahih Bukhari, then they're probably
And
authentic.
Sahih Muslim.
Yeah, Sahih Muslim. They're probably authentic. But I just want to have a bit more.
But Dawood, let me reply, because what you're saying is
Yeah.
it doesn't sound like the Prophet. It sounds suspect because it doesn't sound like the Prophet.
Not consistent, yeah.
But well, I mean, firstly, that's another problem with the hadith literature is it's full of inconsistencies.
Yeah.
But the second problem with
But
that,
that's due to my
the
knowledge,
second
because I don't
problem
know
with
every
that,
hadith.
the second problem with that
Yeah.
is also the Sirat literature confirms that Muhammad practiced slavery.
Yeah.
The Sirat literature confirms that Muhammad tortured people. The Sirat literature, yes, the Sirat literature confirms that Muhammad had people assassinated. The Sirat literature confirms that Muhammad waged war against other people. So if you're going to, and also Dawood,
Yeah.
the fact of the matter is, if you go and use Sirat literature in the game of trumps with Hadith literature wins over Sirat literature. Hadith literature is what you use to understand the Quran, not Sirat literature.
Yeah.
So your defense is weak, but your defense is also flawed, because what you're really saying is, I don't want to believe that Muhammad is the kind of person that would take a slave back into slavery after he's been. Anyone who does real history goes off what the sources say, and those sources say that there was a master who owned slaves and he let them go free, and then Muhammad stepped in and he said, no, bring them back into slavery.
Yeah, and I want to know the context of that. That's
So-
all I'm saying. I want to know the context.
The Quran also
Do you know the
says,
context, by the way?
the Quran also says, the Quran also says that you can own women as slaves and have sex with them. That is a right given to you in the
This is the wrong
Quran that I read to
intellection.
you
The
with
right
the
hand
source.
possession.
The right hand possession. The right hand possession. Permitted to you are your wives and those that your right hand possess. Clearly, if and those that your right hand possess is not also your wives, because that would be naming the same category twice, and that would make the Quran guilty of being just bumble jumble nonsense.
Okay, you know that verse, for example, yeah, what your right hand possess. As someone who lives in the 21st century in London, how would I implement that?
Right, but the reason why you can't implement that is because you live in a society that was influenced by Christians like William Wilberforce, who stopped slavery. However, you go to Sudan, you can do that.
Yeah.
You go to Mauritania, to Saudi Arabia, you can do that. What do those three countries have in common? Because it ain't ethnicity, it ain't language, it ain't economy, it ain't culture.
Well, it's a country.
What's the one thing that they've got in common? What's the one thing they've got in common?
Religion.
What religion?
Islam.
There you go. That's the problem.
But then, look, this is what I'm trying to say.
Look at what you've done to
I
the
think
world.
you're brilliant. I think you're brilliant, and I think not brilliant, but you're good, right? I think you're very good. But what I would love you to do, as someone who speaks and someone who wants to be scholarly, you really have to start to apply the holistic thing. When you say, for example, it's just religion, it's not religion. For example, there's a report that came out recently by the BBC, and it looked at slavery in Kuwait, and they were selling. Look, honestly,
Slavery in Kuwait.
They're selling slaves. They're selling slaves on Instagram and all these. You can go and have a look on BBC. There's accounts.
What's the primary religion of the Kuwait?
Hold on. Before we go to religion, the report focus on the economy. Now, why is it so?
Because it's the BBC, and the BBC wouldn't blame Islam for anything, even a jihad.
Perfect.
But you see, this is what I'm trying to say. I think you have serious blind spots, and I ask Allah to help you to remove them. But the point I brought Kuwait into this is because in Kuwait, the economy permits it. Why? I think every second person has a maid or something. 2 in 4 women have a maid in Kuwait. Now, what has that to do with the religion? No, it has to do with the possibility.
Thank you.
Has to do with the possibility and the capabilities that they can afford such things. It's to do with the policies that the government has, the kafaya policies, sponsoring. To have a sponsor and come into the country. So this is what I'm trying to say to you. When you do this, when you just look at the religion, you are just looking at one aspect. And because there's some truth in that aspect, you're misconstruing reality. What I'm asking you to do is like, look, have religion and be critical of religion, but then also look at all the other facets.
Okay, let me reply to that point. Let me reply to that point. Yeah, of course. Yes, of course.
The last thing is, for example, and you see where the fallacy comes in. You do this the same thing when you want to validate something. You say, for example, Christianity was the driving force that abolished slavery. No, it isn't. If you talk to any historian, they will tell you one of the major reasons, and that's why the government got involved and paid out on reparation to slavers, was because of the economy. The economy changed. Oh, you know what? There are these Quakers. They've been saying for 200 years now to us to abolish slaves. You know what? Time permits it now. Let's pay out all the slavers. Let's pay out all the slavers.
Let me reply.
David Cameron is one of them.
Let me reply. Because unfortunately, Dawood, you don't know church history. I know church history.
Depends. I don't know.
The reality is, as far back as the 10th and 11th century. So this is still in feudal times, when the economy was dependent on serfdom, slave labor. Christians were abolishing slavery.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that?
At the same time, Muslims were enslaving people.
Define what you mean by
slavery. The idea that I can own you as a possession and you are my property. That was abolished in numerous Christian countries right from the 5th century onwards. The Byzantine Empire abolished slavery. It abolished
by the state, or were there people or were there individual saints who were
over the course of church history, both.
But
over the course of church history, both. Stop. One second. Dawood, you made a claim. I'm going to have to shout. I'm not shouting at you. I'm just shouting over him.
Yeah.
Right.
I listen.
So you made a claim that I'm being narrow, that I'm only looking at the religious aspect.
Theology. Yeah.
But let me just demonstrate why you're wrong in your counter thesis. Because on numerous occasions in the course of the last hour or two that we've discussed this topic, I have used Saudi Arabia and the Arabian Peninsula as an example. Why did I do that? Very deliberately. Because we both know that in terms of what has fashioned the culture, economy and politics of that peninsula since the time of Muhammad, it has been Islam. Which means that in that region of the world, if Islam had the ability and rationale to abolish slavery, you would be able to point to the example of Saudi Arabia as having done so, and at no point at any time has it or have you. It didn't abolish slavery, the Saudi Arabian state, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which I know is not 1400 years old, but my logic stands that area of the world never abolished slavery, either by the direction of a government, either in Damascus or in Constantinople, nor by the will of the people, i.e. the people themselves saying, it might be legal for me to do this, but I don't want to do it. Which means that Islam never transformed their hearts to want to do it. Islam failed. It failed culturally. It failed economically. It failed politically. It failed socially. And one example that demonstrates this complete failure is the example of slavery. Where is your caliphate today established by Muhammad?
Okay, look, first of all, and I said this at the beginning of this whole debate, I said, look, I am very careful when I make statements, and I will be honest when I see wrong, even amongst the Muslims. I'm not going to hide things here. One thing I want to say is this: the slavery that took place in the West and the slavery that took place in the Western context has its own genealogy and it has its own DNA. It was totally different how it's manifested. Remember I was saying that?
Yeah, you did say that.
I have a picture on my phone that my phone died, okay? And I found that...
We'll just believe you. Go on.
I have this amazing, I found it fascinating. It was a painting of a merchant, an Ottoman merchant and his slave. And the article was about white slavery that many people don't talk about. Yeah, there is such thing as white slavery that took place.
Those of us who know church history know all about the slave trade of the Ottomans.
Yeah.
Because we suffered it.
Yeah. And there's many things that I disagree with what the Ottomans have done. I would say this here. Now, the picture is of the merchant and his slave. And you know what's so funny? You wouldn't be able to tell who the slave is and who the master is. Okay? So when you say things like, well, the Ottomans didn't abolish it, it's because their perception of slavery was totally different. We cannot compare the two.
Yes, we can.
No, we can't. Why not? Look, one reason, I can give you one. Now, you said that slavery was started by the Enlightenment period. Now let me actually correct you and teach you some history that you may not be aware of, not because you're stupid, you're a very intelligent man, but maybe because you're just not aware of it. Pope Nicholas V, he issued a papal in 1492, I think, or 1495. Why was a papal? A papal for the Muslims is an equivalent of a fatwa. And the fatwa was based upon what? It was based upon, and this is what I say, politics. Alfonso V, he was the king of Portugal, approached the Pope in 1492, and he said to the Pope, Pope, the Saracens, who are the Saracens? The Muslims. The animists and the pagans in Africa, they have this gold trade, and they're benefiting from it. He is obviously a politician. You should subjugate them to Christianity. What did the Pope do? The Pope, and it's called the Bull, right? It's very famous. It's a very famous paper. All of you go and Google it. Pope Nicholas V, the papal or the bull, and he issues, and in it, and we have it to this day. He says, and hereby, by the decree, I issue that Alfonso V has the right to go to enslave the Saracens, to enslave the pagan Africans and the animists. And you know what that is? If you know the transatlantic slave trade, you know that the Portuguese were the first Europeans to come to Africa and to torment and to destroy the lives of millions of people. Millions of people. I'm obsessed and I hate ISIS. I say this in the camera. I hate ISIS. My heart, if I could, I would fight against them. Yeah? They've killed 100,000 people. The transatlantic slave trade has killed 12 to 30 million humans, and these are conservative numbers. Now, I've just shown you how.
I'd like to reply to this, Dawood.
I've just shown you how a government and organization systematically decreed, allowed a state, a European state, to go and enslave other people. And that is, if you ask me, the Pope is the head of the Vatican and has been the head of the Vatican for a very long time. If you ask me, that history clearly points out to you and shows you the differences and the slave trades. And I'm not.
Okay, can I reply?
Are you proud of the Pope, the Christian?
So one
Pope doing that?
second. 1 second. He has just compared. Which Pope was it?
Pope Nicholas.
He has just made Pope Nicholas equal to Muhammad.
No,
so in other words, a bad example of a Pope is as good as Muhammad. That's what he just did.
No,
because Muhammad permitted slaves. Muhammad permitted his followers to invade lands that were not their own and suppress Christians. Do you know what it's called? It's called dimitude. If you don't believe me what dimitude looks like, go and speak to the Greeks. They had 400 years of it shoved down their throats. Go and speak to the Romanians. Go and speak to the Hungarians. Go and speak to the Albanians. Go and speak to the Lebanese Christians. Go and speak to the Georgian Christians. Go and speak to the Armenian Christians. Go and speak to the Coptic Christians. Go and speak to the Ethiopian Christians. All of these groups, Dawood, suffered because Muhammad's Sharia law permitted Muslims to go into their lands, to steal them, to kidnap them, to oppress them and suppress them. Now his example was a pope. I'll stand here and say that that pope was a failure of a man and as a Christian. All you have to do is say Muhammad was the failure of a man and as a prophet. That's what you have to do, Dawood. I've condemned the pope, you condemn the prophet. Perfect. Now, let's just say this. I want to give an attestation by a scholar. His name is John Azuma. John Azuma is not some white Caucasian apologist. He is an African scholar and he has studied the slave trade. The book that I am quoting, Dawood, for you is The Legacy of the Arab. Sorry, I can't read it because I'm getting old. The Arab...
47.
The Arab what?
47.
I can't even read it. Arab something in Africa. Page 156 to 162. John Azuma states, now you stop listening, but that's fine.
No, I haven't.
In the areas like North Africa, the Middle East and Turkey, black slaves, this is black slaves of Arab Muslims, did the meanest and the hardest work. Now bearing in mind, his argument is that the slavery of the Muslims was this benign, nice thing where you couldn't tell the slave from the free man. But John Azuma has gone in to study the historical records, not just one photograph, and this is his conclusion. The first generation and plantation slaves in Muslim lands was as harsh and cruel as any other such system. Which means that the Islamic slavery was just as brutal and savage and dark and as twisted as the colonial slave trade. But here's a difference. The colonial slave trade lasted for 300 years. The Islamic slave trade has lasted for 1400 years and it is still going on today in Sudan, in Mauritania, in Saudi Arabia, and without any prompting from me, Kuwait. And what do all those countries have in common? Is it their economy? No. Is it their culture? No. Is it their ethnicity? No. Is it their political leadership? No. What do all four of those countries have in common? Islam. That's the problem. I am not being narrow. We've already talked about Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, the socio-economic political context of that peninsula has been dominated by Islam for 1400 years. Muslims, even if it was not passed in law that they should not have had slaves, if their heart was truly transformed, they could have freed them. They could have ceased to participate. Like Muslims don't participate in drinking alcohol in our kuffar state. But they didn't. They did continue to sell and buy slaves. Why? Because Islam failed to change their hearts. Am I being unfair? Am I being unrealistic? Where is the fault in my logic?
No, you're right about that. Slavery wasn't ended by Islam.
I agree.
It was ended by Abraham
Can
Lincoln.
you show him the reference where Jesus confirmed slavery? Can you just
Again, I don't think that.
Can you let him?
You said
okay.
you said quite a lot of stuff. You said quite a lot of stuff. But then you said like, there's no similarities and.
Well, let's deal with a point that's close to your counterpoint. Your counterpoint was I'm just focusing on religion. So deal with the example of the Arabian Peninsula, where Muslims could have just said, look, we're not participating in the slave trade, but did. Where Islam has dominated every aspect of that society, politically, economically, socially, morally, in every possible way, in art, in culture, in everything.
Is it?
It has. It has.
Are you sure?
From the time of Muhammad, Islam has dominated Saudi Arabia.
No, it hasn't. What about?
Oh my gosh.
No. That's the point I'm trying to make. Look, before we go on, you said something along the lines of.
Let's deal with Saudi Arabia.
Yeah. You said you mentioned Saudi and then you mentioned Sudan, and you said, well, their economies aren't. It's not the effective factor of why slavery exists. Do you know of Sudanese economy? And you know what? You know how.
He's making the right point.
Do you know how the economy is built? In
Their economy is pretty much a modern economy.
It's a wolf
Yeah,
in
but-
sheep's clothing.
But did you know that Sudan, for example, also heavily depends on oil, just like Saudi?
So you're saying it's oil that leads to slavery?
No, I'm not saying that.
It's a wolf.
That's what you're trying to
No,
say?
no.
So what are you saying then?
I am saying to you that you're making loads of points that I'm sure that if we were to go into the details,
Mauritania doesn't have an economy built on oil, it still has slavery. So
yeah,
what's
but
your
then,
point?
but what else are they built on?
Islam.
See, that's what I'm trying to say. So Mauritania has a non-existent economy to begin
So
with.
we've got multi-billion economy in Saudi Arabia. We've got a failing economy in Sudan,
Yeah.
and we've got zero economy in Mauritania. So we've got the highest level, the medium level, and the lowest level of economy,
Yeah.
and we still got slavery. Why?
And then that's what how you're comparing economy. You do know that certain economies, it doesn't matter how the GDP is. Let me finish. That its manifestation, can create situations where certain things are viable to do. For example, let me tell you Mauritania and Saudi Arabia, those two. In Saudi Arabia, you are able, because people are extremely wealthy, okay, you have the ability to own mates. In the UK, you can't.
That would deal with my point.
I'm dealing with your point, but you have to allow me to be nuanced.
My point.
If I can't be nuanced, then I'm not. I don't feel I'm being intellectual. I'm just being honest with you. I want to be nuanced. I want to open up these conversations so that people can watch and be like, oh, what Dawood said that. Let me go and watch.
Yeah.
And then they can learn something, or maybe not. Maybe they can prove me wrong. So what I'm trying to say to you, look, it doesn't mean that economies, they resemble each other based upon their GDP. They can resemble each other in different forms. For example, like I said to you, in Saudi Arabia, or Kuwait, every 2 in 4 women own maids. This is something that we don't have here. The economy allows that.
Massacre of Banu Qurayza.
Then in Mauritania, right?
And actually children.
The disparity between humans, that you would have power clans versus like immigrants in all these things. It facilitates these things to happen.
Right, one second.
That's what I'm trying to say.
But the point is,
So it's
Dawood,
important.
if their economies have dissimilarity, the dissimilarity is sufficient enough to eliminate economy as the causal factor.
Have you just, what did I just say to you? I wanted to see if you understood what I said.
You were
Because I
saying
think
that
it's a good point.
you were saying that the structures within those societies
Yeah.
permit
Yeah.
the holding of other people as property. So in
Yeah.
Arabia,
Yeah.
it's because they're rich,
Yeah.
and in Mauritania, it's because they're poor.
Yeah.
Did I hear you right?
Yeah. I'm
Now-
saying it's not the defining factor,
Right.
but it's one.
Right, one second. Now let me demonstrate why your logic.
Yeah.
Dawood,
Yeah.
right? You strike me as someone who's sincerely trying to defend his faith, right? And I can respect that.
I'm not.
One second.
I don't feel defensive.
You're
Yeah.
trying to defend your prophet
Yeah.
from the evidence, and I get that. What I'm saying to you though is, right? The reason why in Saudi Arabia someone can own a maid as a slave is because the government does not make it illegal and does not enforce a law of illegality.
Okay.
The reason why in Mauritania someone can own someone as a slave is because the government doesn't make it illegal, and in the case of Mauritania, probably doesn't even have the resources to impose the law. But that is not true in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia has the money, has the means, and has the ability. It's a well-organized state.
Yeah.
It could abolish slavery if it wanted to.
Yeah.
The people could refuse to participate,
In it, yeah.
but they don't.
Yeah.
Now what's that pointing to?
Yeah.
It's pointing to a historical precedent that has established something in culture that people think is acceptable.
But has that to do with Islam?
Yes, it has.
So why aren't there slaves in Senegal?
Because they aren't as good Muslims as they are in Saudi Arabia.
Oh, that's, you see,
So-
that's your criteria.
One second, bro.
What?
Senegal was colonized, right?
Yeah. So yeah.
Was Saudi Arabia colonized by Europeans?
Depends how you want to define it. They were to an extent, yes.
1400 years. 1400 years. The thing is,
I
you,
define it the way I
bro.
want
The reason why you want to whitewash history is because don't bite to him in the same way that I'm not biting to Yaya. Don't bite to him. Ignore me. Stay focused on me like I'm focused on you. Yeah.
Touch me, please.
Right.
Yeah.
Stay focused on me like I'm focused on you.
Thank you. Thank you.
For 1400 years, Islam dominated every aspect of the Arabian Peninsula. Okay? It is not an accident that that culture still embraces slavery.
Yeah,
it is
I agree.
because of Islam.
You could say that, but then I give you an example. In Senegal, it doesn't exist.
Senegal was colonized by Europeans.
Oh, you know, you're doing the whole because the Europeans came to,
One second.
to Africa.
We use slavery, we abolish slavery. Agreed? We abolish slavery. When we abolish slavery, our gunboats suppressed the Berber pirates who were taking slaves.
Bob, listen.
Yeah, I don't know, but yeah.
Yeah,
Bob,
French
white people
French
didn't-
and British people,
White people
French and
didn't
British
operate
people,
democracy.
when they decided finally, their conscience was woken up to abolishing slavery, they started imposing that around the world. Right? And I think that was right.
When you colonize,
I think
Islam dominated
other
huge
countries.
tracts of the world in the Ottoman Empire and never abolished slavery, even though they had the chance and the opportunity. They never took it. They never took it.
But we remember, we established that already. I already said to you that the criteria of abolishing slavery, I'm saying, and this is why I believe the Quran is so superior. Because the Quran is a book that is secular. So whenever something arises, so say, for example, today, Bob, look, we live in a time that it could change. 50 years from now, slavery could be the thing again. When that happens, okay, I will be with the people who are going to fight with yourself, because you feel, I seem like you would be someone like fight against that system, that slavery does not come back. But what I'm saying to you is that the Quran itself would have regulations how to deal with it. Do you remember the example I've shown you, that fascinating picture? There was an Ottoman merchant and his slave, and you would be able to tell who the slave was. The reason why I mentioned that was because, the reason, by the way, I forgot to say that. The reason why I mentioned that is because the manifestation of slavery in society could have been different to how it was in Virginia or Mississippi with the lynching of people, right? I'm not trying to say that the Ottoman slavery was better than the I'm just saying they're different, and therefore when we compare them, because that's what we keep doing, we're not being intellectually not being as precise as we should be, because their manifestation, its time, its history, its influence are totally different.
Battle of Khyber.
Can I reply?
Yeah, sure.
So my reply is this. I quoted you an attestation by a scholar who studied this very subject, and he has stated, having done research into the Islamic slave trade and of its treatment of black Africans, his conclusion was that it was every bit as brutal and as savage as the European slave trade. Every
you
bit.
say that?
John Azuma says that. That's not me. Go and read his book. Go and read his book, Dawood. Go and read his book. That's his attestation. Your argument is essentially based off a photo. Now,
No, it was a
one
snapshot
second.
of
It's a snapshot,
society, of
but I'm
society.
giving you the attestation of a scholar who's done in-depth research into more than just pictures and into more than just one picture.
Yeah.
He's gone into the records. He's gone into the documents.
So have I?
Brother, the
have I.
end of the day is
Yeah.
this is the choice that faces you, Dawood, right? Because I saw glimpses of the internal battle within you.
I will lie.
that you-
I have no.
one
I'm
second.
not defensive.
One second.
I
You
don't
one
feel
second,
ashamed,
Dawood.
but I am
One
nuanced,
second,
and you
Dawood.
don't like that.
You say that, but you
Yeah.
had the opportunity to say on camera. The camera will testify to all of
Yeah.
this. You had the opportunity on camera to say that you were proud of the rights that Muhammad gave you. You
And-
declined to do so.
No, I didn't.
When I
didn't.
quoted Muhammad having bringing people back into slavery that were released,
What did I
and I
say?
quoted Sahih Dawood and Sahih Al-Bukhari, your instinct was to distance yourself from your own literature and your own authorities because your conscience was telling you you don't want to be associated with that kind of man, and I don't blame you.
Why do I have to
So,
affirm?
one
Why
second.
do I have to affirm?
One second.
It's like black and white with
One
you.
second.
Why do I have to affirm?
One second, bro. Right, I am saying to you
Yeah.
that you need to pick up the gospel,
Yeah.
you need to pick up the Bible, you need to read it for yourself, and you need to read it without all the lies of the Dawah team. You need to read it.
There's loads of beautiful
Read
things in
it.
the Bible.
Read it.
There's loads of things
That
in the
would-
Bible that I am amazed by.
Have you got a Bible?
I have a Bible at home.
Okay.
There's something- you got the wrong guy,
Yeah,
brother. I'm not.
that's fine.
I don't have an inferiority
What I'm
complex.
saying is, what
I
I'm
don't
saying
defend.
is, what I'm saying
It's
is,
just how
Dawood,
it is.
what I'm saying is,
nuanced and you don't like it.
what I'm saying is, Dawood, no, it's
Yeah.
not about you being nuanced. It's
It
about
is. It is because what's the definition of nuance?
no, that's not about you being nuanced. I've got no problem with
Oh,
you
now
being
it's not.
nuanced.
Okay.
I got no problem with you being nuanced.
Okay, because that's
But
what I'm doing. It's
what
I'm
the
not running away
people
from
will
stuff.
make their own judgment whether you wanted to distance yourself from Muhammad's example or
I
not.
haven't.
They can
I
make their own judgment.
I haven't.
The
I
camera,
just-
Dawood,
Yeah, sorry.
let people
Apologies,
make their
apologies.
own minds up.
Apologies.
Let people make their own minds up. I've said what I've
Yeah.
said you have, you said you haven't.
Yeah.
Let people watch the video, let them decide for themselves.
Sure.
But the fact of the matter is, what this is, and this is what I leave you with, right? And it's what I leave everyone who's listened to this debate all the way through, especially if you're Muslim. You need to ask yourself in good conscience, can I follow the example of Muhammad in everything that he did? And if you can't, it's time to find yourself a better example. And if you look at Jesus and you can follow him in every example that he did, then it's time to follow him. Right, 1 second.
Look,
You need to
12,
pick up a Bible,
47,
you need to read it for yourselves
Jesus example.
without the lies of the Dawah team, without the script that Muslims hear in the masjid, and you need to come to conclusions independent of the lies you're told about the Christian faith.
Okay. First of all, he said to follow the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ with everything he did. Look, our jurisprudence does not even allow us to do that. We can't even do that. Look, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was, for example,
sorry.
not allowed to take
Thank
charity.
you.
We are allowed to take charity, so we can't follow him in that. So this is what I'm trying to say. I feel like, again, I think you have huge potential, and the critique, some of the critique you brought up today was valid. I would say that. But I also say that because you make sweeping statements that are incorrect, and I showed you how incorrect you were. For example, the Enlightenment thing. You were like, oh, Enlightenment brought back slavery. I've shown you, and this everyone can go and research, in the 14th century that Pope Nicholas, who is, whether you like it or not, he is part of Christian history, who sanctioned a decree to Alfonso V to go and enslave Africans, in particular, Saracens, Muslims.
Was that wrong?
Huh?
Well, what the Pope did, was it wrong?
It was wrong, yeah, because I'm a Muslim. And
When Muhammad
yeah,
did
yeah.
it, was it wrong?
No, it wasn't. Why would
So when
why
the
would it-
Pope does it, it's wrong,
Yeah.
but when Muhammad does it, it's right. Do you? You're essentially
That's not the reason
your
why. That's not the
defense.
reason why. That's not the reason.
Dawood, your
Again, look,
defense.
you can't. How are you commenting? How?
Dawood, your
Explain
defense.
to me. Explain to
Go
me,
on.
please.
Go on.
Explain to me. How in the hell are you commenting on something like Pope Nicholas? We don't even know he existed.
Right.
What you have to do now, first of all, is
Let me
go
reply.
back- You have to go back and research this.
Let me reply.
Then rationalize it, and then you can say.
So let me reply.
You can't.
Let me
can't
reply.
Use him. You can't use him as that evidence. Oh, but you compare.
No, I can,
am
and
not
I'm going to
comparing
explain
him.
why.
I wasn't comparing Pope Nicholas, by the way, to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. The reason why I brought up Pope Nicholas is because historically he said something incorrect. It had nothing to do with the Prophet.
I will accept the correction.
So what?
Dawood is right. I am
No.
wrong. I am wrong.
There's no-
The reintroduction of slavery happened before the Enlightenment. But here's the problem. Dawood's essential defense of the Prophet was, I'm a murderer, you're a murderer, so therefore I'm
No.
justified in being a murderer. No, that doesn't work. And he knows it doesn't work. Saying that if I am a liar and you are a liar, does that make it justified that I am a liar? If I am a murderer and you are a murderer, does it make it justified that I am a murderer? If I own slaves and you own slaves, does the fact that you own slaves make it right that I own slaves? You all heard it on camera. When Pope Nicholas
Why are you comparing?
allowed, because you did, when
No,
Pope
what happened is
Nicholas,
he made historically
and I've accepted the historical correction.
Yeah,
I've
but
accepted the
I'm not
historical
comparing.
correction.
That's a straw
I'm
man.
comparing.
I'm not-
I'm comparing.
You.
Tell me why my
Elaborate on his
comparison.
comparison.
Why?
Elaborate on it.
Tell me why my comparison is wrong. You said on camera when Pope Nicholas allowed Catholic Christians to enslave Muslims, that was wrong.
Yeah, why?
I am saying.
Why?
I am saying.
That's why.
Then if it was wrong for Pope Nicholas, why is it right for Muhammad to permit Muslims to own Christians as slaves?
There's obviously a reason why.
Go on.
There's obviously a reason why I think what Pope Nicholas did was wrong.
So why is it right when Muhammad did it?
No, the reason why Pope Nicholas, what he did was wrong, is because Pope Nicholas instructed Alfonso to go to places that were sovereign. They were sovereign states.
Like Ottomans,
No, they
like
were,
Mamelukes,
they were West Africans.
like Uthmans.
Well, that's fine, that's fine. But I already said this. If you look at Islamic history, you'll find a lot of problematic things. So I have no problem with that.
Did Muhammad permit Muslims to own Christians as slaves?
Sanction it.
Did he sanction it?
Well, hold on. What do you mean?
According to Sharia law,
Yeah.
we've already got you on camera
Yeah.
saying that you have the right to own other human beings as property.
Woo!
That the camera will.
There was a clause. There was a big clause.
There-
There was a very, very big
Can-
clause.
can
That's what I
you-
mean with nuance.
Can
can't deal with
can you own Christians as slaves? According to Sharia law,
Muslims are slaves, Dawood.
Huh?
Can you own Muslims
No,
as
I
slaves?
can't.
can you own Christians as slaves,
Via
Dawood?
warfare.
Can you own Christians as slaves?
Can I own Christians as slaves?
He knows the answer's yes.
No, I'm trying to think. Let me think.
Dawood, a Muslim can have another Muslim as a slave, bro.
Huh?
A
If
Muslim can have
the
another Muslim as a
Christian
slave.
wants a war
not
against
initially.
Muslim,
No, I'm saying it's,
if the Christian,
no, I'm saying as it's a warfare thing. We're saying the clause is slavery is done on the warfare. Now I won't do the apologetics thing. Yeah,
it's not
Islam
about
is.
apologetics.
I'm
Habibi,
not
look,
saying you're
look,
doing
Habibi,
it.
when
I'm
you
not
say-
saying you're doing apologetics.
No,
I'm just saying. Let's just
Habibi,
be
when
Can
realistic.
you own a
Habibi,
Christian as a
Habibi,
slave?
Habibi.
You can own a Christian, you can own a Muslim and
Habibi,
non-Muslim.
Habibi,
There you go.
When you
But
say,
that's the problem.
Under a clause though.
No, Habibi,
when
when
you
you
go
say-
to war with a township, sorry, I'll let you go.
No,
I
no,
just-
but you said something that needs correcting. You said you can own a Muslim as a slave.
You can't,
can't.
Akhi.
You can't.
You can. How many-
No,
how-
no, hold on, wait,
Go on.
Habib, wait.
Go on.
The reason why you can't do that is because I can't go and own a free Muslim. If I own someone and he becomes Muslim, of course he's going to be. That's what. you have to say.
I'm saying if your Muslim tribe,
I'm
yeah,
free, I'm free.
For example,
Yeah.
a Shanti Muslim
Yeah.
has a fight with a Fanti Muslim, warfare.
Yeah.
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 If one trumps over the other,
Yeah.
are you telling me that one cannot take the others as
You can do
Jariya?
it, but it's not
I'm not
allowed.
saying, bro.
You're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to own a free Muslim.
Can you own a free Christian after warfare?
Possibly, yeah. I don't
Can
know.
you own
I
a
do
free
not know.
Christian
I do
after
not know.
I
warfare?
say you can own a free Christian, a free Muslim. The clause is
I-
warfare.
I
He's
agree
right
with
what he's
him.
saying, because in a war, if somebody beats somebody else,
Bro, I'm
they
saying
can
history-
take them
history
as
Ladies and gentlemen,
Is that
spoils
jurisprudence?
Bro,
of war.
Ladies and gentlemen, what you have just seen on camera, what you,
Sorry,
what you have just seen on camera are 3 Muslims saying that it is okay to have slaves after warfare. That is the problem with Islam. That is why we
If
can
a
do
Muslim
better
fight
than
against-
Islam.
If Muslim fight
You can't own
against
another
Christian,
Muslim as a slave.
The Christian will do the
Christianity
same.
doesn't allow
The
that?
Christian-
Personally, in my understanding
The
of Islamic
Christian-
law, I think you're right and he's wrong.
Okay.
The
But
On that
Christian will
point,
do the
on
same.
that point.
You can't
The
own a free man.
Christian will do the same.
So Dawood's
Out of war.
position is that you can't, in war, you can't take a free Muslim as a slave, but you can take a free Christian as a slave.
Oh, I don't
This
know, I don't
brother's
know, I don't-
position,
I don't
this
know
brother's
jurisprudence
position
behind
is that in war you can take Muslims and Christians and anyone else as slaves. Does anyone see the problem that none of them have a problem with slavery? That's the problem.
No, but you can't. It's like Dawood said. It's about nuance. We're not saying you can go to your neighbour's house who lives down the street from you and take him. We're saying in times of dispute, right, where the solution, well, the other solution is either you kill them or you leave the women folk to fend for themselves. It's a means of integration. I'm not talking about the chattel slavery where you
Do a thought
abuse and
experiment
slave-
with me.
Right.
Let's say there's a civil war in Britain.
Right.
The nationalists come to power,
Yeah.
ethno-nationalists come to power, they decide to kick all the Muslims out, and we all know that that'll end in a war, and then there's a war. In that situation, could you Muslims take people as slaves in this country today?
Yeah, if
Yes.
Yeah, and
Yes.
that's what I said early on. Yes or no?
If the
That's what I
Christians
said
are
early
able
on.
to do the same,
That's what I said
it's the
early on.
same. because
Okay,
it's-
so
it
what
become
you've
a-
got,
it become a-
what you've got today
it's
is
not
2
Islamic
Muslims
rule.
in the 21st century in Hyde Park in London saying that there is a circumstance in which they would legitimize the use and capturing of slaves, and they are doing it because of the example of Muhammad.
No, it's
Case
not about
closed.
Muhammad.
My point is
No, it's
proven.
not-
We
it's
can
not-
do better than Islam,
Yeah. Can I
ask
and
you
that
a point?
better
Christianity-
is Jesus Christ.
On the point of Christianity doesn't allow that, no?
Christianity does
Would
not
allow
48,
sanction
47,
slavery in.
So let me answer that point. Let me answer that point.
Can you read Luke 12, 47, 48?
It's not just like going to Tesco.
Can you read
If there's civil war-
can you read your Bible? Luke.
like only
I want to address this point
It does not make
because
the
this brother said,
Ask the question.
this brother asked the question: does Christianity permit the same? Let us be clear: Christians definitely have done the same.
Right.
Definitely have done the same.
Here we are.
However, you cannot show me in the New Testament, the New Covenant, where it is prescribed that in the conditions of war you should do that. Christians have done that. Christians have done that. However, it is not justified to take slaves in war.
This one here and this one.
Go on.
Read it.
Yeah.
What's it say? That servant who
give the
knows his
reference.
master
Yeah.
will or does not do what his master wants will be beaten
Yep.
with many blows. But the
Yep.
one who does not know and does things deserving punishment will be beaten with few blows.
Yep.
This is
Now, shall we
Jesus
talk about that
confirming
verse?
slavery.
Yeah, fine.
Let's talk about that passage.
By the way, I'm only asking for your view. I'm not taking
One
to put
second.
Christianity on trial.
1 second. Right. Because they quoted a verse out of context. You didn't. It was by Yaya's direction
I am.
because he told him.
Yeah.
Because none of them actually bother, as always, to pick up a Bible and read it for themselves. They just read the script. Let's read it in context.
Yeah, read it.
Read it in context. Luke chapter 12, starting at verse 35. He started reading at verse 47. So let's just come quick to the quick. Peter asked a question. Lord, are you telling a parable to us or to everyone? So what is being mentioned? What is a parable? What's a parable?
Metaphorical.
A metaphorical story. What's a
It's a
parable?
metaphorical story.
So this is not an
But
instruction.
can we actually read?
1 second. This is a parable. Jesus taught in parables. Now let me explain why the Bible teaches us in parables.
The Quran does too.
Because the Bible uses stories because it is trying to read it from 30, read it further back, not the bit that Yahweh highlights, the whole thing.
I'm not
And you
Yahweh,
should do the same.
Yahya.
Yeah,
Not Yahweh.
or Mr. Bean. Now, the fact of the matter is, right, brothers, this is what Jesus teaches in parables, and the reason why he teaches in parables is this, is because the new covenant is about becoming a particular kind of human being.
Right.
It's about being a certain human, a certain way of being human. And our Lord taught in stories so that you could capture the ontology of that humanity. And in this parable, what is being taught is watchfulness, alertness, the idea that we should always be watchful to our Lord, that we should always be expectant of Him, that we should always be alert to the fact that He is returning. That is what is happening in that parable. What Jesus is not doing, He's using a parable, using a picture that everyone is familiar with. So He's teaching in his socio-cultural context.
So in his context,
Yes,
slavery would have been
normal,
Right.
but Jesus didn't have slaves,
Okay.
even though he could have had slaves and no one would have criticized him.
Was that from a Roman perspective or a Judaic perspective? Or
The Romans had slaves.
Right.
The Roman law permitted slaves, and that corresponded to the Torah law.
Right. Okay.
Not denying that slavery is in the Old Covenant, not denying that it is in the Torah. But what I'm saying to you, bro, is that in the New Covenant,
It does away with that.
it does away. There's no sanctioning, no saying take slaves. Now let me ask you this question. To your heart, which is better? The idea that says you and I are equal in dignity and I can't own you as a possession and you can't own me as a possession, or the idea that says that we're not equal in dignity and you can own me in possession or I can own you in possession.
so-
Which of those two is better?
In a utopic situation, I would say the one where neither of us own each other is better. But
I agree.
You mentioned the part about us being different in rights, or a class sort of system where you can own me.
I'm
For
going.
me, I believe
Take care.
I believe that in warfare it is only an option. I don't think it's mandatory or a must. And I believe that it's a way to integrate a foreign hostile entity into your own.
Thank you.
I don't believe in like I said, this chattel style slavery where you oppress people and beat their backs and what have you. That's not the picture that I want. Although you can't. It's often hard to separate slavery from that because of past cases of where it's happened. Now, I'm saying in a utopia, yeah, that would be fine, but we don't live in a world where everyone is equal or everybody's treated equal. So although it might sound nice in a utopic thing, I'm saying as a very practical element of living in this day where warfare can happen any minute, I don't believe it is the better choice to not be able to
So let
own
me ask you.
slaves.
Let me ask you this question. You said that it is optional,
Yes.
right? So if Muhammad is the best example, in a time when he could have been free of slaves.
Yeah.
I mean, we agree that Muhammad was in a position where if he had wanted to, he could have been free of all slaves.
He could have been free of all slaves. But
Correct.
He
did slaves.
He did have slaves.
Did he sell slaves?
He did, I don't know about selling slaves, but like, as in, are you talking about, did he have an occasion where he did, or was that an occupation of his?
There were occasions when he did.
There was an occasion where he did, yes.
Right. So Muhammad had slaves, he sold slaves. Did
he
he
also
allow
freed them as
did he
well.
allow his followers to have slaves?
The Quran doesn't forbid it. So
that's a yes.
No. The Quran not forbidding it doesn't mean it employs you to do so.
Right.
So it's a social context was that slavery was a norm, and the Quran
you're saying
didn't.
it's an option.
Right.
But the point is, your best example, even though he could have chosen not to have slaves, decided to have slaves. And don't say he was bound by economy.
No.
One second.
Wait.
One second.
Go on.
Because Jesus Christ lived 2,000 years ago when slavery was normal. He could have had a slave and he never did.
Yeah, that's fine. But
so could have the apostles, and they never did.
But did Jesus Christ ever rebuke those people who owned slaves not to? I don't know of any recollection in the Bible where I can find that. But that's besides
That's
the point.
a fair point. Allow me to address that. Remember how the Bible works? The Bible works in stories. We had that parable about being watchfulness.
Yeah.
So I want to try and give you a way to read the Bible, and everyone else by extension. Yeah. The way to read the Bible is you look at the stories of the Bible, and you try to see what kind of humanity is being presented to you.
Fine.
Right? You meditate on what are those, what is that kind of humanity. Right. The scriptures describe for us a kind of human. And that human is meant to be generous in heart, is meant to be selfless in conduct, humble in expectation and attitude. He's meant to be someone who seeks to serve, seeks to love, bases his life on hope, bases his life on faith, is watchful towards his Lord, is obedient towards his Lord, seeks to serve his Lord. He bases his life and conduct on love. This is the kind of humanity that you see in those Gospels. Now, if you are that kind of person who's generous in heart, loving, hopeful, is someone who seeks justice, is that kind of situation, bearing in mind that you've got this context of people being made in the image of God, this biblical understanding, in that kind of context, does it facilitate slavery, or does it go against the culture of slavery?
I wouldn't say it facilitates it, but I wouldn't also go as far as to say that it fully negates it. One of the things I was thinking of when you were talking is let's say there was a mass manumission of slaves.
You mean like when William Wilberforce and the British Empire released slaves?
Yeah, because it was getting on top for them, and it was going to turn into a situation which they wouldn't have been able to handle. They didn't do it out of the kindness of their hearts. But William Wilberforce...
Or when William the Conqueror abolished slavery in the 11th century England.
I didn't know that happened, but
there you go. Why did William Wilberforce abolish slavery in the 11th century?
You told me. I don't know why he did that.
It was because it couldn't be the case that a Christian could own another Christian as a slave.
But they'd done it for however many centuries.
Exactly. The Anglo-Saxons were weaker in their discipleship than the Normans, so when the Normans came over, they abolished slavery.
Okay. Fair enough.
And that was in the 11th century.
But when you say that, can you define that? Because I asked it earlier as well.
You said define what, sorry? Freeing slaves?
No, I want you to define that movement that you're talking about. Are you talking here about state-sanctioned manumission of slavery, abolishment of slavery, or are you talking about...
In the 11th century in England...
individuals who were involved in slavery?
So I'm going to address. In the course of church history, it was both. William the Conqueror and the Normans did it from a state level.
Yeah.
Saint Ovidius did it from an individual level. Okay. Saint Ovidius was doing it in the 4th century.
Yeah.
William the Conqueror was doing it in the 11th century.
Okay.
The 4th century example of Saint Ovidius predates Islam, and the 11th century example of William the Conqueror is contextual, contemporary to Islam.
So
in both before and after Islam, or both before and during the time of Islam, Christians provided a better example.
So post 11th century, you can't find any slaves in Europe, or
of course you can. Of course you can. But what I'm saying is, there was never an emancipation movement in the Islamic world that came from the state.
I don't actually know.
Fair enough. Not that I know of one, but I'm saying I can't think of a time where every Muslim came to, or the Muslim state came together and said, we're going to free all the slaves.
Yeah.
But I wonder, what is the actual, because I don't know about Europe, but I'm saying what would be the actual result, yeah, of freeing slaves in Arabia where slavery was heavily practiced? What would have been the fate of the slaves in the desert after being freed and having no refuge, no homes, no work? What is the practical?
I get your point.
Actually give me a practical
you're saying socio-economically it would have been impractical.
I'm saying, yeah, I can imagine
But what I'm saying to you, bro, is that over 1400 years, yeah, those socio-economic, let's use America. Abraham Lincoln was inspired by Christianity to oppose the slave trade. Yeah, they released slaves.
You believe he was?
I believe he was inspired by
right,
Christianity.
Even though he clearly has quotations that show that he was as racist as every other Abraham Lincoln.
Oh, by our modern context, he could be considered racist. But no offense, Muhammad would also be considered racist.
Yeah, if you want to say that. But
when he calls Ethiopians raisin heads, if I
often hear that.
Bruv, if I called you a raisin head, right, I'm referencing both your shape and your colour.
Okay.
That would be racist, right?
See, this is the thing I
would that
often
be
hear
racist?
From. Yeah, if I said Ethiopians are raisin heads, that would be racist. That's not what the Prophet, peace be upon him, said.
Right. Are you sure?
Yes. The Prophet, peace be upon him, said, Sam'an wa ta'an, hear and obey.
Yeah, even if. There you go.
So if you say even if, that's not a statement to say Ethiopians are raisin heads. That's just to say. Look, no, it's not racist.
Okay,
one of the two. Let me answer. One of the two factors you have to understand is Ethiopians within that Hijazi region.
I gotta go in 10 minutes, by the way.
Sure. Ethiopians in that Hijazi region, are generally known for being the slave class, right? Yeah. And then they also, generally speaking, the Arabs had racism in them. So they did, at a certain point in their time, they did look down upon being black. Yeah. So the Prophet here is not urging slavery. What he's urging is hear and obey the leader, no matter if he's repugnant to you, no matter if he comes from a slave class which you don't like, no matter what it is about him,
I get
as long as he rules you by the book of Allah.
You just said, you've just made the same problem that he made. To defend Muhammad, he quoted a pope who permitted slavery. If you simply say, yes, you did. If you simply say, if you simply say that because you're a liar, it's okay for me to be a liar.
Yeah, that's not what I'm saying.
Right, but hold on 1 second.
Yeah, go on.
You just said, well, I said Abraham Lincoln was inspired by Christianity and he freed slaves. And then you said, but we have many quotes that he was a racist. Well, I have, 1 second, I have quotes that Muhammad was a racist.
Fine,
so be consistent. Be consistent.
So, if Tommy Robinson, right, said, obey your prime minister, even if he was a nigger, would you say that was a good comment or a bad comment?
It's not the same.
Why?
Because nigger in its essence is a slur.
You're avoiding the point he's making.
If Tommy Robinson said, obey the leader, even if he's a black man with a head like a raisin, I wouldn't say that's racist.
So what is head like a raisin then? What does that signify?
You know what you do
I just said that. I just said that.
What you're doing right
it's just the signal. He does that all the time, but he knows what he does.
Habib, you know what you're doing right now? This is what you're doing. You're commenting on the language of 7th century Arabia, and you're telling us in 7th century Arabia,
the reason why I mentioned the Abraham Lincoln thing wasn't to say we've got bad, you've got bad.
You can tell by the context.
The point was you were saying he was inspired by Christianity, and for me, growing up in a Catholic background, I know that racism is not something which is inherently Christian.
If he is, that means that when he just uses description, it's a negative term because he said even if he's
when Muhammad described the devil and he used a black man as an example of the devil, would you say that was racist?
No, I wouldn't say it's racist.
So you believe the black man is like the devil is like a black man?
So the hadith you're going to mention is that
the
Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, whoever wants to know the likeness of a devil, let him look to such and such a man. Then the commentator of the hadith goes on to say, and he was a sturdy black man with ruddy hair or whatever.
Yeah.
That's not the statement of the messenger. The statement of the messenger is, this man looks like the devil, not because of his black skin. That is the comment of the commentator after.
That is the to a black man and saying, the devil looks like this
So
man.
I'm saying to you, you cannot attribute that to the prophet. You can only attribute that to the person reporting.
Was the person that he pointed to black or not?
It was black.
So he was pointing to a black man and saying the devil looks like this
He's
man.
saying it looks like the yeah.
Would you say one of the immutable
makes it-
characteristics of that man was that he was black?
The immutable characteristic of you is whiteness. If I turned to you and said you look like the devil, yeah.
Well, I
that's not
had
just-
that earlier by the Hebrew Israelites. The Hebrew Israelites did exactly.
If I said-
The Hebrew Israelites did
if I said-
exactly that thing.
I can guarantee you, if I did make that statement, it wouldn't be because of the color of your skin. It might be because of some look that you projected, or some sort of evil aura that I get from you. I'm not even beginning to insinuate what the prophet meant.
Yeah.
It just said whoever would like to see the like of Satan, he looks like this. He also similarly said, the prophet also said, I saw Esau.
But he could have
a
pointed.
brown man,
he
handsome.
could have pointed to an Arab.
He
could
was an Arab.
He was
He was
a
a black Arab.
Right. So fair enough. He pointed
Yeah.
to an Arab. He could have pointed to multiple different shades of people.
But okay, but
But he picked a black man.
if we're arguing from an angle of revelation, yeah, I know you don't believe in the Prophet Muhammad, but from the perspective of the Muslim, he couldn't have pointed at any other man if his description is accurate. If he's saying this man or the likeness of this man actually looks like Satan, yeah, it's not because of his black
It
skin.
also
It
said
looks
that
like
black man would
Satan.
destroy the Kaaba as well.
Yeah.
Ethiopian.
No, it says that Ethiopian, not a black man.
Ethiopian was a term for black people.
No,
Yes.
come on,
Yes,
bro.
it
No,
was.
it wasn't.
Ethiopian
So are you saying he's Ethiopian,
Historically.
but he's going to come from somewhere else?
But
No,
there aren't many
it's
white
specifically an
Ethiopians.
Ethiopian
Let's
man.
be honest.
I'm saying historically, Ethiopian has been used for black.
It's not been
Yeah.
used for black man. Ethiopian has been used for Ethiopians, bro.
No,
show us
historically.
a reference in Arab history where it
It's a
points to
region.
someone that's
It's
a
a region.
non-Ethiopian person speaking about blacks as Ethiopians.
I have to find it. But
Well, then don't make a claim if you can't substantiate
But
it,
the
bro.
thing-
Oh, trust me, Paperboy
You're
can bring
muddying
out the
water.
evidence.
Yeah, no, but let him. I don't like people to bring up stuff and then say we're going to go back later.
Bro, I've really got to go.
Sorry, yeah.
I've really got to go. Okay. Than the Adnan Rashids and the Shamsis and maybe next week we can talk about another topic.
Yeah.
Do you have a Bible, brother?
I
Encourage you both to read it, and what I would suggest to you, you have a read of it, not for the sake of finding fault.
I wouldn't do
Pick a passage that you want to read and you want to discuss, and the next time I'm here, come and grab me, right? And we will sit down and we'll go through that passage and discuss it like intelligent people.
But you see, me and Issa, we're a bit different. You see, me and Issa, sometimes we talk about verses in the Bible that amazes
The thing
us.
is, even when you talked
Yeah.
about watchfulness,
Yeah.
there's nothing I disagreed with.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I
Yeah,
think
all
as
of it
well-
is all of it resonates.
Yeah.
So it's the issue is not the teachings of Christ.
Yeah.
Well, it's not fully the teachings of Christ. The issue we have, is based on creed.
Yeah.
That's the issue we have, or that's the issue I have at least, coming from. And I say it not to make it a validation, but I'm saying my background was someone who grew up in the Roman Catholic Church.
Yep.
So my issues are creedal.
And I would say to you that because the reason why I became a Christian was because a Muslim tried to convert me to Islam.
Okay.
And I listed 9 of the reasons today as to why I rejected Islam. Yeah. And you can watch the video because it's like I'm not going to go back through all 9.
Yeah.
But and then the brother jumped in on one of those reasons, and we've discussed it, and we've touched on the various other ones. But what I find is that many of the reasons given by Muslims to reject Christianity all apply to Islam. Christians disagree about which books are in the Bible. Muslims disagree about which hadiths to trust. Christians have textual variants in their manuscripts in the Bible. Muslims have textual variants in the Quran. Christians have historical development within their terminology and their understanding of their own theology that we see like things like the Council of Nicaea. Muslims have exactly the same in Islam. So every single reason given by Muslims to reject Christianity is also a reason to reject Islam.
Okay, so let me ask you a question regarding scriptural stuff. Do you believe that having Hafs and Asim next to Walsh and Nafi'?
These are for those that are uninitiated, those are different recitations of the Quran as documented in different books, codices.
Do you believe that having these two together as textual differences, which I agree they are textual differences, perfect. Do you believe it's the same as, for example, the Codex Sinaiticus having or not having certain parts that later Bibles have, or Revised Standard Bible and that matter of things? Do you believe that the two are like to like for you to?
So question directly and clearly. In terms of the definition of a textual variant, they're identically the same.
100%. I agree.
In terms of their scope, I would say that there is argument that the Quran has been maintained as a text in a purer form, but not pure.
Okay.
But the fact of the matter is, Islam doesn't depend on it being better than something else, it depends on it being perfect.
100%.
And the evidence demonstrates that it's not, which means that a central claim about the Quran is false.
Right.
By contrast,
Which is, what's the claim about the Quran?
that it is perfectly preserved.
Yeah.
These are the claims made by Ahmadiyyat, that it is an unchanged text that has been preserved for 1400 years. That is a totally now fallacious argument. Even the Dawah team have abandoned it, and now
I don't believe it's fallacious, and
Yeah.
let me tell you why.
Wait 1 second.
Go on, yeah, sorry.
By contrast, Christianity doesn't make the same claim about the Bible. Our religion doesn't depend upon the Bible. That's the thing that Muslims don't get.
Are all Christians in agreement with that?
All Christians that have ever read a book and picked up the Bible would agree with that. Because the Bible was written by people that already believed what was in the Bible.
I get you. So you're saying you depend more on the church rather than the Bible itself?
I am saying those two things live in a symbiotic relationship that is like this, and so any problem with one is corrected by the other.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, so the reason why I don't believe the preservation argument is fallacious is because all the narrations that I can name to you have all been perfectly preserved, by the chains of narration going back to the Prophet Muhammad. The only thing I would agree with you is that it's fallacious when the Muslims say no, there's only one Quran, where there are different narrations.
How many Qurans are there then?
So there's 10. Each of them has 2 imams. So you have Hafs, you have Shu'bah, whatever.
Yep.
But what's important about these things, and one of the things that increases my faith in Islam, is that none of the narrations contradict each other. That's my point.
One second. I would agree with you. I would agree with you that the textual variants inside the Quran do not create a kind of contradiction that is jeopardizing any Islamic doctrine. Totally agree with you. You know, king and owner, they are different words. Not every king is an owner, and not every owner is a king. But kings can be owners, so they're not a contradiction. Likewise, the textual variants in the Bible do not compromise the essential narrative of the Christian faith. I know all the textual, not all, I know many of the textual variants. I certainly know the biggest ones. Right? And I'm not challenged by any of them. But Muslims try to tell me that I should be, and I'm not.
Sorry.
And I'm not.
So, see, for me, as a young boy growing up in the church, I wasn't being taught by the Catholic Church.
I believe you. I
wasn't being taught that there was a symbiotic relationship. I was being taught that this is the verbatim word of God, right? And you have to believe anything in it. Now, I can understand from your perspective why it's not really an issue, because you're talking about this symbiotic relation. So where there's a difference, you go back to the church or whatever, and you reconcile it. Similarly, Islam has a thing where we go back to the Salaf sometimes, and they explain certain things and they reconcile it. I get it, but
it's just like
what we're trying to tackle, what at least I try to tackle, is this view of many Christians, and I'm saying because they're in my family, these people actually believe in the Bible as being 100% accurate, and if you are able to show them that there are contradictions, then their faith becomes weakened. They no longer, they start to question, hold on, if it's not as accurate as I thought it was, can it really be?
And let me address that point, because many Christians are ignorant of their religion. They believe in the straw. I've seen it here in the corner. Christians arguing to defend a straw man created by Hashim. Hashim creates a straw man, he attacks the straw man, and the Christian is so ignorant of his own religion, he actually defends the straw man, as if the straw man really is Christianity.
So what would that straw man?
But the reality is contradictions in the Bible, apparent contradictions in the Bible. I let us just assume that they're there. It doesn't compromise the essential narratives of the Christian faith. Now, I am not convinced that there are any legitimate contradictions in the Bible. But what I'm saying is my faith doesn't depend on whether they're there or they're not.
Right, okay.
By
It's
contrast,
inconsequential to you then.
inconsequential. By contrast, if I showed you contradictions in the Quran, which
Then I'd be stuck.
then what I suggest is the next time I'm here, I'll bring my Quran because I've looked for it and I haven't got it, and let's go through what I think are contradictions in the Quran.
Cool.
And if I can show you real contradictions in the
I'll
Quran,
have to revise my faith.
will you have the courage to revise your faith?
Definitely have to. I'd have no other option but to do so.
All right, then let's do that.
Cool.
Have to go.
That's good.
It's really nice to speak to you.
That's good.
Yeah, you look after
I
yourself.
won't lie, I've avoided you too now because of what I've seen with the conversations with the other people.
And I'll
But
be
as, long,
dying to see that
as far as I can have a conversation with you like this, we're all good, man.
Yeah, so let's do that. Yeah, yeah, because I think that you're sincere in comparison to the Dawah team. Yeah, the Dawah team are insincere people. I think you're sincere, and I think that when you see the evidence, you will probably have the courage to follow the evidence where it leads you.
I'd have to, man. There's no point in being wrong and strong. So.
Amen. Anyway, good night. God bless. Very briefly, yes. So I'm just going to do a quick wrap up and then I'm going to go. At the beginning of this very long episode, I gave 9 reasons why I rejected Islam and stood by Christianity. 9 reasons, of which one of those reasons was the example of Muhammad, the failure of the caliphate, the failure of Islam, and the inconsistency of the hadith literature and the ideas surrounding it. And then a Muslim came and spoke to me and we've had this big long debate. And you have seen on camera today in the 21st century Muslims arguing for slavery. Muslims defending the right to have slaves and saying that there are contexts in which they could take slaves. You have seen on camera those same Muslims trying to distance themselves from the worst episodes recounted in the hadiths about Muhammad. By contrast, I have not been ashamed of anything that Jesus said or did, even when they misquoted my Lord. It was very obvious that they were taking his words out of context and that they don't understand the Christian. Christ taught in parables, and he taught in parables to talk about the kind of human being that we should be, to give us a picture of another kind of humanity, one that is not selfish, one that is not wrapped up in himself, one that is not given over to his lusts and his own selfish desires, but one who has self-control, builds his life on love, seeks to be a service to his brothers and sisters and to his neighbour in need. The choice is very simple. Try to follow a failed experiment called the Caliphate that we've already seen has failed in history, or be part of a community that has stood the test of time and still stands 2,000 years despite the fact that there has been countless ideologies trying to destroy it. We Europeans destroyed the Caliphate. Tick to us, we win, they lost. That's a fact of history. We carved up the Caliphate like a Christmas cake and then we ate it up and turned it into our colonies. That's how great Islam is. It couldn't even defend itself from us. But the church, the Europeans, the same Europeans who destroyed the Caliphate also tried to destroy the church and they failed. The church is still here despite the attempts of the Nazis, despite the attempts of fascists, despite the attempts of liberals, despite the French revolutionaries, despite the Vikings. They all failed, the church is still here.
Perfect.
The scripture says that wisdom is known by its children. Look at the fruit of Islam. 1400 years and it still never managed to abolish slavery, even though it had the chance on multiple occasions in multiple places, and not once did it manage to do so. It couldn't even transform the heart of the Arabian man in the Arabian Peninsula to simply not participate in something that was illegal, in something that was legal. And let's not pretend that Muslims can't do that, because they do it with bacon and alcohol all of the time. So if they can do it with bacon and alcohol, why can't they do it with slaves and human beings? Why? Because in Islam, one of those things is forbidden and the other is permissible.
Excellent.
By contrast, the Christian ontology is one that says that human beings I should serve, I should honor, I should uplift, I should have a generous heart and a generous spirit. That is counter-cultural to a culture of slavery, which is why for 2,000 years Christians with variable different degrees of success have fought against the slave trade. Sometimes they have succeeded and sometimes they have failed, but there is a witness all the way through history. In conclusion, the choice that you have to face is this: do you want to follow Jesus Christ or do you want to follow Muhammad? And I offer to you our Lord Jesus Christ as better than Sharia law. Good night and God bless.